I'm generally pretty open. As long as we don't like kind of veer into like political stuff or anything like that, I'm pretty happy. I just like to kind of keep it about the game, you know. Mm. uh, no, I've pretty much done like kind of broad overviews, so I'm really happy with kind of where the people who hosted me have taken it. So pretty much wherever you want to take it in the book, I'm cool. If you want to drill down on something specific, I'm good. If you want to be kind of broadly go over it, that's cool too. So you liked it? Oh, cool. Sure. Good. Okay. I tried to make it like part two. I just wanted it to be argumentation, and I just wanted to be as like airtight as I possibly could. And so I spent most of my time was kind of actually sort of drilling down because like I've seen kind of how the ankle biters kind of do their thing, and I just wanted to. We have a lot of short form content like in video and things, and those are great. And then it seems like you point to that and they're like, well, that doesn't account for XYZ. So I wanted to kind of be the person on the back end that sort of caps it all off. Like, well, if you don't if you have a problem with something, just read the book. It's about as exhaustive as I could make it. So. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. I know. That's how it goes sometimes. Yeah, I think it's gonna be fun. I've been enjoying these, so like going on with different people and stuff. Okay. Loading. It says I do not own any token with vision in this scene. Everything still looks dark. Should I refresh? Yeah, it says I don't own any token with vision in this scene. It says tavern at the top, overworld map. Never actually used Foundry, so this is not super familiar with the UI. Yeah, it's loading. Ah, yes. Okay, there we go. Gotcha. Yeah, I see the room and all that now. Cool.
All right. The last 30 seconds here, and then we're going to let folks filter into the chat. Okay. So at this point, I believe we should have nearly everything and everybody. Here, how's everybody doing tonight?
All right.
All right, Mr. John, how are you doing tonight?
Well, I'm doing great. Just kind of so ready to like hang out and have a good time.
I'm glad. I'm glad. So we're gonna start off here because I'm really terrible at introductions, and I don't think that I've interacted with you enough personally to give you a fitting introduction. So why don't you introduce yourself to the people? Tell them when you started gaming, how you got into this space, and what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Sure. So I got into gaming in high school in like 2006, 2007. And started with my very first game session was with third edition, and then I started. I had gotten fourth, and then through just kind of a series of events, kind of ended up in 3.5, where I stayed for a little while. And then after that, kind of 3.5 kind of went its way. We ended up with Pathfinder, and from there, fifth edition and kind of the more modern editions that everybody kind of is more familiar with. And kind of the entire time, I was sort of the career, like forever GM or DM, and so I kind of got involved in this space with. It's kind of hard for me to pinpoint exactly where, but I would say it was with kind of John Mollison's like Mr. Wargame, Joy of Wargaming channel, and
Okay, that was your introduction.
Pretty much, yeah. And then from there, I sort of kind of got discovered kind of the broader kind of like bro space, and which was really interesting stuff. Yeah, clearly, so much so that I decided to write a book trying to kind of help distill the conversation to kind of like salient points, sort of irrespective of any specific additions. Sort of try to bolster the broader point, be like a primer, so people can kind of understand kind of the logic behind what we're all kind of talking about.
Okay, all right. I think that's a pretty fitting description for what our objectives are here tonight, and how we're going to pursue it. Sort of the terms of the conversation as, I don't know. We're here to be practical. We're here to be objective. We're not going to be certainly not going to be apologizing for our opinions here.
No.
And ultimately, it's in the service of helping people have better games.
Yes, that is my that is my North Star. That is everything that I'm kind of pointed towards, is trying to help people have better games.
Excellent, excellent. Now, you found John Lawson. Out of curiosity, did you find him through YouTube first?
Yes. So I was trying to figure out mass combat and for my own game for really just so it was like a wild hair. Like I had no reason for it. The campaign wasn't calling for it. I just wanted to be able to do mass combat and it not be boring, or like criminally boring. And so I had the bright idea of trying to figure out how to. And so obviously I got chainmail. I went through the rules. I didn't have a background in wargaming. So I started, I did what I normally do when I don't know how to do something, is I start looking up tutorials for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where I came across first Mr. Mollison's series on chainmail, and then sort of his like kind of broader video catalog from there.
Okay. Alrighty. And so when did you actually like make it to Twitter? What was your first introduction to this is always fascinating to me. I always want to figure out how on earth people connected with people like us. Like I met Jeffro by, I think, through Castalia House, and buying his book, and then just finding him on Twitter, throwing some shade back and forth. What was your introduction to the social space, connecting with the rest of us, I guess?
Yeah. So I kind of, I mean, like, is it like I kind of like I learned that there was sort of like an active community on Twitter, and then uh, I figured, I was kind of a lurker for a long time. Um, and when I kind of decided I wanted to write the book, I said I got to get on Twitter. And what I did, like, so basically within a couple days of kind of creating my account, I did a thread on, I can't remember, like I had like an inaugural thread. Oh, I think I did my inaugural thread on one to one, um, one to one
Okay,
time.
that tracks.
And so I know, and what sort of I think endeared me to the space a little bit is that like the very first thread, within the first couple tweets, I stated who exactly I kind of like came to my conclusions through, and sort of been practiced with. So because I wanted to give the proper credit, I didn't want to sit there and pretend that like I thought of it or anything like that. Like for, I had the brilliant idea. I had, I had adapted some of it, but it definitely would not have been there if certain individuals kind of hadn't done what they did. And so I think sort of uh, being kind of able to do that, I think were they were very welcoming after that. So I really have the bros to thank kind of for that I even have an account, because they seem to really like my stuff. And um and I, as I was saying, I didn't want to take, like I said, I wasn't interested in taking any credit. I want everybody to kind of have the credit that I personally saw that they deserved.
That's admirable because I really, there's such an issue just getting people to admit when other people have provided something of value to other
Hmm.
people. Really, in any situation. So that's really generic. But in creative spaces, just getting people to admit, oh, this person contributed. This person did something of value. This person is to some degree responsible for another, let's say, greater figure's success, or sometimes their failures.
Hmm. Yeah, and well, I just don't. What it like, I couldn't. You kind of have to like pick a way to live and then sort of live by it. And so that was kind of where I ended up, was at like, whatever. Well, first off, I don't think it's like that big a deal to have like Twitter arguments, so that doesn't really bug me. Like it's not something I personally like do, but I'm not going to sit here and like try to police anybody's like online actions. It's not. I don't really care. Like, and to everybody, like to kind of the other bros, like, they've been they haven't like invaded my spaces and like attacked people that like I was talking to. So they've kind of
Hmm.
like, let me kind of behave the way I would like to behave. And I like, most of the time they're dragging people that end up in their QTs. So it's like, okay, like, I don't know, at some point, like if you don't want to have the argument, like you kind of gotta like walk away from it if that's the case. So I don't know, like it's just I rambled a little bit. I've kind of lost the plot, but that's kind of where I ended up.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So, I'm going to explain what we're going to be doing here tonight because, as I mentioned in the chat to you beforehand, I have a terrible time just now. OBS disconnected and reconnected for a moment there, but it looks like we're okay. If we do disconnect, this will be uploaded later at some point as a full recording. So, provided that nothing goes wrong here. Okay. It looks okay for the moment. Everything looks fine. So, it really got me nervous. Okay. And because I normally don't know what the hell it is I'm going to do with my creative partners here, we're going to, disable. There we go. Cool. Because there's a cat meowing at the worst possible. I'm going to strangle you. I'm going to turn you into a coat. Because I normally don't know what to do when I'm surrounded by all these other interesting creative people, I decided that we're going to gamify this interview. And because we're going to...
Okay.
Yes, sir. So, I have Foundry Virtual Tabletop open here. You have a human here with not a ton of access to, with not a ton of access to vision and the like, so you are going to be moving your character throughout the rooms here, and each room is going to represent a point of discussion that we can go through. Does everything make sense so far?
Cool.
And
so far, so good.
Viewers are going to get to witness my usual shenanigans, where I am placing walls on the fly and introducing new tokens on the fly. So we'll get an insight into my general poor DMing style. Some of the rooms are going to be empty, so as to provide us with an opportunity to talk about sort of anything spontaneous or go over any points. Are you ready to begin?
I think so.
Okay, so, there's a lot of really good comments here. Full Metal Dragon says, for instance, this book sold me on one-to-one time management, which is insulting to me personally, because he's been a subscriber from the beginning, and my first video was one-to-one time. So this is clearly snubbing me.
It was a great video. I really liked it.
Well, apparently, that makes two of us. Apparently, my subscribers don't think so. Okay, so you can either drag your token here by clicking it and dragging it, or you can, just like that. Or you can use WASD. And then once you get to the door icon on the front, you'll be able to open it.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Indeed. So the first point of discussion here, I'll say, is going to be, wow, that's a lot of... Oh yeah, because it has global illumination on. No wonder. I'm just going to do some terrain there. That's fine. Our first point of discussion here is going to be creating dungeons. What do you think is the value of dungeons in the Grand Campaign and the Living Campaign? Why did you create the different tables that you did throughout the book? What was the purpose and what was the idea behind your recommendations for the dungeon?
I wanted to try to distill the dungeon, because the dungeon is a distinct play style. It's a distinct game state. So I wanted to try to distill it to, what is it? It's like, to its component parts. Like, it should have, like, it should have time. It should be kind of like almost mythological, like cramped and like almost hellish. And you can sort of get, whereas like the flavor and kind of the things that go on in there and what pulls the players into it and sort of is so engrossing is, I think there are some sort of you can reliably like manifest that in like different interesting ways, through like some tables or like some tables or just like through random chance, as well as maybe like a little bit of the dungeon master's sort of interests or the things that like they're good at, like just like. So does that make sense?
A little bit. Okay, it was a little bit rambly, I will say. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been there as recently as a couple minutes ago, so it's fine. So there are tables inside of this dungeon. You make a few recommendations as far as... There's a few tables inside your book, that is. You make a few different recommendations on wandering monsters, random encounters, and the necessity of populating the dungeon not in a
Hmm.
fashion that's static, right? You call it out explicitly a few different times throughout the book. Not in a way that's
Hmm.
static, but like that really reinforces the fact that this is a living place. I think you literally describe it as the living dungeon in a few places.
Yes, yes, because yeah, because 'cause everybody sort of envisions like they just sort of like they think of it like a video game, and whereas like these monsters like have their spawn points and they sort of like they come in and like the little token like when you're playing like Neverwinter Nights or something or Baldur's Gate,
Hmm.
and the monsters are sort of like they're on like their path and they go and they have like set patrols and people uh you know like at a tabletop, some sacrifices are necessarily going to have to be made as far as like you can't expect the DM to kind of like physically move tokens like behind a fog of war to kind of simulate a monster patrol. So it does have to be somewhat abstracted, like for the sake of kind of like the broader simulation, just
Hmm.
by the medium. And so like a lot of people I think don't it's hard to know how, like what you're trying to simulate unless it's pointed out to you. So even like I suggest some tables, um like I would say like the first edition tables are better and more robust, but like my tables sort of train your eyes on what to look at when you're evaluating a different system is the way I envisioned it, at least.
Right, because your tables are something abstracted to like, hey, roll this many encounters, then roll this many encounters, or check on this table, right? And there are a few conditional
Mhm.
statements on the table that say, by the way, if you get XYZ, you move over to this result, or go revisit this other result.
Yeah,
I think
and
that's
it
valuable.
basically, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I hoped it would be.
Yeah, I think it's valuable specifically because people are used to receiving a result and kind of stopping there, not considering any broader applications about what the table means or what could it be gesturing at. And they use this, a lot of, we'll say, gross RPG varmints use this as an excuse to stop right there and say, there's nothing else to these tables. How am I supposed to justify a dragon being inside this room of the dungeon? It just doesn't make any sense. There's no additional information. And so I'm going to stop. And something that you did when you were developing the tables and also explaining the purpose behind your dungeons was saying, hey, the whole point is for you to ask these questions and invent answers to them because the answers will produce game content. The point of the dungeon is not to only harbor a certain number of goblins in 5 rooms total and then not do anything else with
Right.
them. It's supposed to be an exotic
No, right,
environment.
exactly. Right. And it's like the goblins might have their own little like political squabbles, and that's like easily represented through the reaction tables.
Okay, I like it. I like it. Now you have 3 paths in front of you. We're going to move on here. In fact, I'm going to put my little
Okay.
dungeon timer up top. And I don't know if you roll for random encounters every 3 turns personally, or if you do it every 1 turn or somewhere in between. But we're going to use this as our metric
Uh,
for when it's time to move or sort of switch to a subtopic within topics. You're about to say something.
okay, cool.
Okay. Would
Oh
you
no, I
like
was gonna say understanding.
to... Oh, perfect. All right, so you have a few paths before you. You can either travel over some... Yeah, there we go. You can either travel over... Yeah, this is like a little terrain thing. All right, now that makes sense. Now I know why it's doing that. So I always learn new things about Foundry sort of spontaneously, and usually while I'm trying to correct some other problem. So I guess the first topic or discussion... Wait, no. You have 3 paths in front of you. You have a door to the south, you have a door to the north, or you have a pile of mushroom that you might have to jump over. There's gonna be some resolution involved. Which way would you like to go?
I think I will go up. I will go north.
Okay, you will be traveling. Go ahead and click on the door when you are ready.
Ooh.
Okay, I have in this room a bunch of traps, some falling cages, and spinning saw blades, swinging axes. There wasn't a lot discussed about traps within the dungeon, but there was a fair bit about keeping the environment hostile and using the capital D dungeon, describing it as a character, practically speaking, within the book and within the
Hmm.
game that was an active participant in the game, actively hostile and trying to mess your players over. What do you think the role of traps in a dungeon is, and have you made any modifications for a living campaign?
So, so a trap. Yeah. So the trap is basically. So I actually do describe the dungeon specifically as the dungeon hates you. Um, and because it is so it's supposed to be sort of like this mythological place, like I was saying before. So a trap is like monsters are like pure combat. Traps like or not pure combat, but the monsters are a pure kind of like physical force. They typically have minds to some extent, whereas a trap is like impersonal, impartial. If you step on it, it goes off, or sometimes it doesn't if it's like jammed up or whatever. Um, and the trap is supposed to be sort of I think kind of the monkey wrench in the exploration. It's kind of where kind of things the tables can turn. Like you might have like a very combat efficient party, but if nobody is able to detect those traps, they're going to be in for a world of hurt because traps are sort of a unique mechanic into themselves. Is kind of the way I see them. So their function is basically to guard treasure. Their function is to support the tactical opportunities of the monsters in the dungeon. Um, and so that's kind of what they're for, by my estimation. Now, I'm not sure where you might fall in that, Rube, but
Yeah, I think I described
yeah,
in the Your
that's
First
about where I fall on
Adventure. Yeah, I think I described in the Your First Adventure video the different kinds of encounters. There was the combat encounter, there was the social encounter, the puzzle, and then there was the trap. I described traps as being a little bit like, yeah, I described traps as being akin to monster encounters in that the players could theoretically use traps to their advantage, much like a monster encounter could turn out to the player's advantage if it was friendly. If you get a friendly roll for reaction, then obviously the monsters are going to be to some degree desirable. Even if it's something that
it. Yeah,
nominally you would expect to be not friendly, right? Like a troll, I guess, is my example. I don't know why I keep going back to it. I think it's really, for whatever reason, creatures who like eating, I guess, are easy for me to resolve in a friendly fashion, even if they're usually grumpy. That probably says something about me specifically, but I think there's something about the traps where you can't actually take advantage of them until after you have interacted with the trap. And frequently, the first point of interaction with a trap is going to be the player sprung it.
yeah, no, that's true. Like it's not really what is it? The trap doesn't have a reaction roll. It's hostile to whoever interacts with it.
Mm-hmm. And so if the players want to use that to their advantage, they have to engage on the trap's terms. And you described it as being a monkey wrench, which is perfect. The players are on the back foot. It's a reminder that this is not they do not have home field advantage here. They are intruders.
Yeah, right, exactly. I might be I can only really paraphrase it, but I believe like monsters don't even like trigger traps kind of as part of their patrols or anything like that because they would obviously know where they are. So it doesn't like kind of watching the monster patrols like won't help players either. At least it's enumerated in the earlier editions, I think. I can't remember if that was in first, like in the DMG somewhere, or if that was in OD&D, but
I believe it. I believe it. What do you think about the inclusion of mechanic like traps? Because I do hear people who sort of complain that they're unfair, and I get where they're coming from, but it seems like a very fair sort of unfairness where you're supposed to, if you're going into the dungeon, if you're going into fantasy Vietnam, if you're going into any kind of hostile environment, it's expected that the other party is going to have an unfair advantage because you're coming to the table with a host of unfair advantages. Your rate of success is default assumed to be higher than that of the monsters, and it's why your character doesn't die every single session, or your characters don't die as often as the monsters do. You know? But how do you react to that? How do you pitch players on the idea that, like, hey, this is not, there's going to be things in here that don't feel good, but if you overcome them, you're going to have a host of advantages beyond your wildest dreams. You just have to press through it. Is that a difficult conversation for you?
Not particularly. Like if a player's like not sold on traps, then like I don't really know what to tell them as far as like, like what are we doing here? Because whole classes, like even like regardless of whatever system you sort of end up with, is it's going to be specialized toward like the finding and disarming of traps, whether it be like the thief in first edition or the rogue in later editions. So like if you remove traps, like you kind of remove like a good chunk of like the raison d'etre for like whole mechanics of the game. So I don't know, like I'm not exactly like, and that's not how I pitch it. I was like, you don't really know, you won't know what you're missing until it's gone. And it's like the second order effects, I'm very hesitant to sort of rip the guts out of whatever rule set I end up in, without kind of really kind of trying to figure out where all the kind of the wires connect. So yeah, like and that's kind of what I try to tell players is like, look, if you have a problem with the traps, then like play a trap class. Like like there's like there is something to be said for, there is some value to be gained from doing that. Something you've overcome, like you were saying.
I like it. I like it. We're coming up on our dungeon turn here. John, would you like to stay in this room and continue investigating it, or would you like to would you like to get on the move?
Oh, my character's probably a fighter, so if he hasn't got it blown up yet, he's going to probably want to move.
Okay. Alrighty. I have a... Let's see here. How am I going to do this? It's a d6 for random encounters. If I get a 6 on something... Well, if I get... It's a dangerous dungeon. If I get a 5 or a 6, I'm going to fight with you on something.
Okay.
About the book. And that will be...
Alright,
okay.
Let's go.
Oh, and the players get it's public, so no, everybody is aware that I'm not fudging it. Okay, I have a fight to get with you in about. I have to get in a fight with you about skill systems because we've just been discussing traps for a little while, right? And skills, are usually the thing that we use to get rid of traps.
Correct.
So there's a game mechanic, at the very least when it comes to this specific thing, and maybe that's the issue, but you spend a lot of time, I shouldn't say a lot of time, there are 2 sections of the books where you specifically call out traps as, or not traps, skill systems as being a kind of fake gameplay. Can you explain your reasoning to the chat, the viewer, as to why that is briefly?
Yeah, so there is a method of kind of, in my estimation, there is a method of running skill systems where you're basically using it as a substitute for the actual game in front of you. So, like kind of like basically like overcalling for skill rolls, or allowing like kind of ridiculous things to be rolled for, or whether it be like something criminally easy or supposedly impossible. Sometimes people are like, well, you can roll for that because they're sort of, and they'll just sort of let skills like just have like a ton of rolls, and that's like kind of a substitute for actually like the players playing the game.
Right. The role to seduce, sort of the worst extremes of even engaging with the quote mechanic, which is just it sounds like it's the equivalent of, well, people, you pitch it as the equivalent of a fighter just sort of spontaneously rolling their sword, rolling to attack every 10 minutes, and that being a substitute for the game.
Yes,
Is that like
because
an
I
accurate
do.
summary?
I played it in those games. Yeah, I think so. I
Okay.
think so.
You were in the middle of a sentence. You said you play in those games.
Yeah, I've played in those games where it's basically like, it was raining outside. You gotta like roll reflex save or something to, or roll
To
acrobatics. Or
avoid
I
getting
think
read.
like 3.5 had like, yeah, to avoid like not slipping in puddles or whatever. Like it's just and people will laugh, and it's always, they think it's like funny when it does like, oh, I rolled a natural one on like to survive the puddle. Or like, oops, you bruise yourself, and it's just like it's funny, but it's not the game. It's not the game, and it does sort of it gets tiresome.
Yeah, when somebody starts really on the player side and starts interrupting to say, "Hey, I don't want." If somebody interrupts to say, "Hey, I'm going to roll to skip this rock," because we've been described as being next to a river, and now I'm going to roll to skip this rock. It's like you're taking up space, limited social space. It's really bad on on online play, but even in the game in real life, you're taking up space in a way that people can't get back. You're taking up time in a way that people can't get back.
Hmm.
But this is a
Yeah,
random
and it's like
encounter, so this is a fight section. So I gotta fight with you on something here. I think
okay.
I wish that you had paid a little bit more heed to, and you can correct me if this is wrong. I wish you had paid a little bit more heed to what skill systems in real games produce, limited as they are, or a lot of games have both real and fake skills scattered all over the place. Some of them are going to be used for instance, perception is counted against stealth in fifth edition, and a whole bunch of others. Uh, there's the discussion of traps that we just had, where thieves' tools are a tool set, and you roll for that if you have proficiency, and that allows you to escape a trap or potentially rearm it or rejigger it in some capacity. I wish that you had mentioned this or paid heed to it in the book for
Hmm.
people who know that those systems are real, because those are the only ones that they actually engage with, right? Those are the only ones that they actually play
Yeah.
with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So yeah, like it's funny. It's like I've it was a similar thing. Some like, people have said like sort of like kind of the drill down a little bit more on the topic. I think my goal, because I kind of wanted to like describe it broadly, and I was
Hmm.
hoping that the reader would kind of fill in the gaps on that themselves as far as that goes. But maybe there's something like maybe there's another book in me at some point to kind of like get a little more niche or something, maybe something shorter. But I kind of felt like that particular, like to drill down too much on that, I felt like was kind of beyond the scope of the primer.
Right.
Was where
And
I was ended up with.
swapping off of fight mode for a second, like I think that's obviously the
Sure.
case. Like you first of all, you can't address everything, and you've already established
Right.
a baseline for literacy, and you must be this tall to ride. Like, okay, you have to be approaching the work in good faith in order to approach the conversation in good faith or approach criticisms in good faith. And if somebody is going to come in and say, but wait, I once rolled, my DM had a homebrew mechanic where if we rolled Arcana, then there would be this little rock, paper, scissors interaction, and you're not really saying that rock, paper, scissors is fake gaming, right? Realistically
Right.
speaking, it's it's fine. Because we're talking about skills, because the majority of if somebody looks down on their character sheet and remembers that 90% of these things did not get used, except for when the DM asked them to roll, it didn't really seem like anything changed besides that, or the bard, or somebody made a meme about seducing the dragon and rolling a 20, these don't really seem to come up in the game the same way that spells and weapon attacks do. So, like, why is that? If you approach it from that angle,
Right.
it makes perfect sense to not go into, oh, by the way, there are these exceptions here.
Yeah, and also, so there's like a kind of a debate tactic that I find extremely tiresome and generally just won't engage with at all. And it's like where the person sort of pretends that they never heard of anything at all. Like it's called like playing the hatchling. Um,
Mm.
and they just sort of like pretend to be an idiot. And oh well, what you're saying, like so you're saying that like they act like they've like never heard of a skill check before. And if I have to like kind of go into what I mean, it's like, well, you haven't really played the game. So it's like you don't really like, or either you haven't played the game or you have played the game and you're just pretending not to understand what I'm talking about. And in which case, if you haven't played it, well, then you can kind of eventually play it and then you'll understand what I'm talking about. Or, or you're kind of approaching it in bad faith and there's nothing I can do for you. So no amount of addressing exceptions will ever be enough for that kind of argument, which is why
Right.
I just generally I don't bother. It's just not, it's a waste of my time. It's a waste of anybody who's looking at the argument's time.
I'm inclined to agree. Yeah. Because we've had to deal with it for so long in all of these. We've had to deal with it for so long on Twitter and YouTube comments and blog posts on Discord, just people picking out these little statements and fixating on them, and your only options are to either ignore them, call them racial slurs, or to just keep asking the same questions of them over and over and over again and hope eventually they break out of this ChatGPT error loop that they get stuck into.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like all the time I spent like kind of arguing, all the time I would spend with like arguing with people. Like there are people who are actually sort of willing to like, well, what do you mean? And it's like you sort of have to discern like, okay, this person is seriously trying to understand, and they might even say sort of, they get into the exceptions argument, but there actually is a different way that they approach it because you'll address
Yeah.
one exception, and then they're like, oh, I never thought of it that way, and then it's like, oh, I can actually have a conversation with this person. And even if they don't agree at the end of the conversation, that's fine because we're still we're further along than we were. And the way I see it is like nobody wants to be a sucker. So
Mm-hmm.
they might be sold on something in theory, but if they haven't done it themselves, they're not going to defend it kind of full throatedly. And I wouldn't expect them to. So, but if they get to the point where they're like, okay, if somebody pitched it to them and say you want to play in this game, they might say yes, and then their tune would change. So I kind of consider that a win if they're what is it if it's sort of viewed legitimately. I would like even if they don't view it as like perfect or whatever, or they're not kind of
Right.
like as enthusiastic about it as I am. I can still consider that a win if they're a little bit more understanding or something like that.
Yeah, Hugh Fosaker in the chat brings up a perfect example. 101 time and downtime. Why would I want to sync my character's bowel movements? It's just embarrassing. Miserable.
Yeah, there's nothing I could say to that person because that person just doesn't like me for it's for them it has become it has taken on a valence that they just sort of view me as enemy, and there's nothing I can really do about that, unfortunately.
Mhm.
But it is what it is.
It is indeed. Okay, next up, what do I have here? So, are you ready to... Would you like to stay in this room? Would you like to move up? Or would you like to backtrack to the other wing of the dungeon?
Let's move up.
Okay,
I'm glad I did.
indeed. You know what, I'm gonna do 6 is what will be our fight, but I'm only gonna do it on a 6. I'm gonna do /R 1d6. Then okay, so I've no fight here. There's just treasure. You rolled a 20 on the Appendix A chart for room contents, and we have treasure. So you have a few different recommendations in the book. You make basically the Gygaxian recommendation of, by the way, don't give people too much treasure, but if you don't have treasure in a given session, then people are going to you're going to suffer some kind of rapid attrition in your game that's made worse by the fact that there's so many other recommendations for treasure in this book and in other games. There's so many things that require treasure for advancement that you've gone into here. What do you think, this will be my opener, what do you think the appropriate rate of acquisition of treasure is? Because that's actually, I feel like it's not in this book.
No, because I think it's kind of situational. Like if they're playing it, like very safe, like let's say the thief is in, doesn't feel comfortable being out in the big city because they're afraid of getting caught and hung by the neck until dead. Well, so they go out to the village hamlet and they're looking for the big score. Well, there's no big score in the village hamlet. They might be able to pilfer some things here and there. They might come like maybe a random encounter, a merchant passes through, they'll be able to pilfer something there. But that's not where the money is. That's not where the action is. So like it's really sort of got to be measured by, and I think Gygax says as much. Sort of the risk should kind of be compensated by reward.
Right.
So if you're going into, so if they're searching and they're researching and they find like a dangerous dungeon, or they're specifically asked for it, they're like, I'm gonna look for some treasure maps. Maybe they find out like the old antique dealer had one, and they get like, oh, they'll give them the treasure map if they do something for this old antique dealer. It's really sort of like, I think treasure should be sort of the prerogative of the players as far as they need to be motivated, and it shouldn't just be dropped in their laps. But if they're motivated and they're still not getting any treasure, like that's a problem. They won't be motivated for long, because what's the point?
Right. And so basically you've given a pretty effective, what I think, yeah, this is definitely an effective method of determining whether or not you're giving enough treasure. By this standard, if you're suffering attrition in your games, like people are leaving, or they're not as invested and they're just kind of waiting for things to happen, where they started, or they had a spurt, a surge, we'll say, of motivation and engagement with the game, probably it's something wrong with either the rote mechanical structure of the game is doing something to discourage them from play, or the rewards of the game that they've anticipated are not approaching.
Yeah. If they're running into sort of like really horrifying monsters and they find, a couple thousand copper pieces, yeah, something's wrong. Something's wrong with your arithmetic. So even if your table, like, so that's the thing is, right, like the tables help you sort of overcome your own biases. But if the tables are telling you like the Baylor was guarding like pennies, I don't know, like maybe you kind of need to make an executive call there is kind of how I would say it. Like that's kind of the exception. At the end of the day, it's got to, the game has to run. So you're not a slave to the dice at the same time. The dice are there to help you. They're a tool. So it's kind of how I see it, at least.
I see. That's a pretty good one. What do you think about I've argued with people about this recently, but this isn't the fight room. So, what do you think about the acquisition of magic items or similar rewards? Is there any kind of ideal pace for people to acquire them? Let's say that you have a motivated party. You have people who are going out and doing the deed and putting themselves in danger and dropping pretty close to 0 hit points, or maybe a little bit below every session. What should they be getting in return?
Well, the magic item tables are pretty robust and large. I don't see a reason why to limit them. Is kind of where I end up. So, a +1. The game is sort of intended to kind of like have these like plentiful items. And the thing, the limiting factor is kind of how expensive everything is. 'Cause, like at least in first edition, like magic plate, plus one is like you could sell it for like 5,000 gold piece or something. It's like some outrageous, like outrageously high number. And the limiting factor is like you're going down to these dungeons, you're getting all this like sweet loot, this sweet gear, and then like if I need to level up, I might sell some of that. And that's the limiting factor, is like kind of like pure economics. But like having it, even just kind of getting it, even if you're not going to use it, is like there is like I think it's like you're robbing the players or something. If it's, I don't know. I don't agree with limiting it. Kind of, I don't agree with limiting it to make it like magic super rare and everything mundane. Especially, in certain systems, it's just not. It's not worth. Like you got to have something to spend your money on. First off, and secondly, I would let people buy it in stores. Depending,
if you could
though,
sell
like,
them, then somebody buys them. Why not you?
Correct. Right. Exactly. And I do roll on. So, like for my first edition game, I do roll on. Like if they ask for an enchanted item, I'll roll on a table, and depending on the enchanted item, it might be more likely to be there or not. But magic is, what is it? Magic is plentiful, but it's like you don't have access to like the entire like equipment library.
Yeah, you don't
just
have
for being in a
access to the
city or
entire
whatever.
list. That seems like a
Right.
pretty effective
And
means of doing it. And if somebody asks, like, they're checking for XYZ, then I could, like, roll a d6, or you could roll a d6 and say, all right, well, on a 3 through 6, it's going to be this item. That item will be present. And then if not, they're going to have to go to a different... It's somewhere out there, but they either have to go to a different city, or they have to go to a dungeon in order to find it. You kind of use it for
right, and
generation.
that could be something interesting that like that your thief could maybe do a spy mission and maybe try to figure out where to get some sweet loot. Or something that could be like a research, like that could be a downtime action. Is like, what, we're gonna go to like all of the really learned people and ask them like, hey, have you heard of this? Or fork up the gold and pay a sage. You just gotta have it handed to you or something. So there's all kinds of stuff you could do if you want to find something specific.
Right, for all the randomness and all the generation that we use to sort of prod and poke people into getting inspired by the items right in front of them, encourage them via nice little coincidences of their imagination and the tables combining to say, ooh, I could use this. I didn't know that magic swords could be sentient. Or I didn't know that a magic sword that I got at level 2 could be sentient. I certainly didn't know that it could have powers and ego to it. I wonder if there's something I can use it for. I wonder if there's something I wonder if there's a quest living inside of this. Living inside of this magic sword. And the GM can wonder the same thing. And for all the randomness...
Right, and that's kind of... I think I...
Go ahead. There's a little bit of delay here.
I think I even talked about... Oh, no, you're fine. I think I talked about that in the book a little bit, kind of like you're supposed to eat the whole animal. You don't leave parts to waste.
Yeah. You specifically reference it as, I'm not going to discard I have this entire deer here, and I have a family back home. I'm not just going to take out the back straps and say, that's enough. I'm like, no, I could use the head for a trophy. I could use the antlers for a cracking flint. I could use the legs for mutton, or the equivalent of mutton, I guess, deer leg, and I can use the bowels for my dogs and the nasty bits for my compost. You're thinking in a fashion where every individual coincidence is a potential new thread for adventure. I have a question following up on that.
That's a really, really excellent way to put it. Yes, I do. That is, I would say I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Perfect. Okay, so this is not just the treasure room. This is also the encumbrance room. And we've got a couple minutes here to figure out, how are you going to carry this treasure back? And how is your DM going to determine how you bring this treasure back? And maybe more importantly, how are you going to decide how should your DM decide how to resolve encumbrance when it can be such a pain? I believe that you have some procedures from your book.
Yeah. So being that like I kind of come from Pathfinder, and a lot of what was in the book was what I used for. I had some tables that used it for fifth edition, and they said they kind of had it was fine. I used it for Pathfinder. Pathfinder is very very granular with its pounds. It's kind of extremely annoying in that way. So my idea was to kind of get everything into basically a 5 pound slot system, and I can sort of summarize the entire equipment list of most kind of pounds based systems on a single chart. So and I tried to, it's very easy. You can just print it out, reference it, whatever.
It
Um,
is. It's very slot. You're not fully abstracting it. You're saying, hey, each of these slots does represent a number. It's just we're not trying to. God, you really threaded the needle here, where you weren't super concerned with every individual pound, right? You're not counting upwards
no,
in the same way that somebody who marks every single ration on their character sheet is counting upwards, but you're not doing it from a completely top down and saying, so long as you're not approaching this threshold, you're totally fine. You're saying, hey, there's little boxes of supplies that you need to that you are going to count until you fill up, but beneath that you don't have to worry about it.
correct. Yeah. You don't, because you're trying to have enough of an encumbrance system to where you get the desired effect, and the desired effect is the players admit that they need help, and if they need, like, that's what you're trying to get.
Mm-hmm.
So like I kind of tweaked some of the weights for things a little bit. My coin weight is very generous with compared. Well, not, I think it comes out to, like, if I had it as like AD&D, it would be like 50 coins. So it's like I the my equipment, my encumbrance list is the coins are half as heavy as AD&D coins, but it's neither here
Okay.
nor there. Um, but it's enough because like everything's heavy enough to where it's easy to track, and if your players are not like well trained on, they're like, okay, I don't want to have a spreadsheet with like all of the individual pounds or something like that. It is simple enough to where they can do it, or they can. I think I suggest that, if they don't all want to do it individually, you have a pack master or a quartermaster, and that person will sort of track the party's encumbrance by kind of totaling up their strength scores and going from there. Um, and eventually, the players will sort of start to kind of get it, and they kind of get into a routine, and they might be willing to, like, they'll probably take on more because they'll be more proficient, and that, like, it basically it trains everybody. It gets the GM used to even thinking about encumbrance in terms of the players. So, because you really shouldn't be like needing to audit them all the time, but you should be able to look at it and be like, that was like that was 75 slots. Like, where are you guys putting all this? And they go,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, okay. And then eventually everybody sort of gets the routine down.
Similar to how when you're making characters and you instruct people to say, "Hey, you're going to do XYZ. I need you to understand a few things about the game before we begin and prep you for you're about to be cast out into the open, and before we even agree to sit down and do characters, I want you to think about how you're going to have to think about treasure, you're going to have to think about time. You should probably have an object of enmity and an object of desire somewhere in the back of your mind that's attached to your character. So you have a
Mm-hmm.
target to move throughout this game. It seems like this, similar to how some people would say you're not going to leave town without a dungeon, without a donkey and a wagon, or Tensor's floating disc,
Mm-hmm.
or yeah, that's going to be my primary example. You tell the players, hey, this is our procedure. You're not really changing the rules. You're saying, this is our procedure for managing encumbrance. Because we're going to group it, we're going to clump it up a little bit.
Yeah, right. That's
Do
that's kind of what I'm after.
you find that the we'll do our encounter roll in just a moment here, but do you find that the onboarding costs of this procedure are heavy, or do people just get it?
I mean, my experience, they sort of just got it. So I think this is different depending. So I have two groups, and they've been both have been excellent sports with all this. The first group, this is sort of their first experiences with a living campaign, so they don't have any sort of other frame of reference. So it's been a lot easier for them to sort of, they're like, oh, I got a track encumbrance, yeah, cool, and they just have done it, and it's never really been an issue. Whereas my kind of more practiced players, they had to sort of unlearn a few habits. But once we kind of got there, they've been even admitted, like, okay, well, first off, it's not as bad as I thought it would be, and it is sort of interesting to like have to know where I'm physically storing my stuff. Like they're involved. It feels like an expedition at that point, which is the goal.
No, that's good. That's good. God, what an interesting point about. We're going to circle back to that soon, I imagine. Alrighty, but we do have another encounter or another dungeon turn here. Would you like to move to a different wing of the dungeon, progress to the nearest door, or would you like to stay in here?
Let's go to the next door. I'll be back with my hirelings later, and we'll pull all this stuff out. So.
Okay, that's very reasonable. Oh god, that was close. Okay, you come across this room of the dungeon and find a miniature setup, almost like a wargaming table. Many of them, with miniature mock interpret representations of nearby villages and towns. Many of them have blood spattered across, or little markers, tokens, figures for units and settlements and defenses sort of scattered across tables. You, my friend, have in this wonderful book a bunch of descriptions on how to generate a world and the importance of generating very specific practical elements of a world or a campaign for your players to inhabit that really don't have anything to do with the most common, quote, practical advice, or the most conventional advice. If you had to sum it up, and this is related to somebody's question, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce their username, but they said, I was going to ask, can you guys give some general essential tips on how to do a good sandbox? I think this is going to feed into it. What are your basics for creating a living campaign as far as generating the world, and why did you pick those specifically?
So, but like as part of like I read a few books as like part of researching all this, and a really influential one on me was Tony Bath's Ancient Wargaming, and it was about kind of how he set up his Hyborian campaign, like I think in the 50s and the 60s, and Mr. Bath was part of the London Wargamers, and he sort of details really excellently and very meticulously like kind of the most important parts of a world in terms of what the people who inhabit that world would be most interested in. So he and I tried to incorporate what he said there into my own game, and I found that he was pretty much right on the money. And I kind of tried to have a general system for generating what I think is kind of the most important thing, very broadly speaking. So the three primary terrain types I break down here is lowlands, hills, and mountains. And lowlands could encompass a great number of biomes, but they typically, a lowland will be, you'd be able to, like, that's like farmable land. That's where you're getting all your graze, your fields, and your pastures. Hills would have like a mixture of, would be a little less farmable, but it would also have a chance of some mines. And mountains wouldn't be farmable at all, but they would have a high chance of mines. And so it's sort of, the three terrain types are sort of balanced out what the players and what the NPCs would sort of be most interested in, kind of depending on their perspective. So maybe at first the lowlands would be lowlands like lowlands would just be like cereal crops, and that's where all your villages would
Yeah.
be. But the players might be interested in eventually going to the mountains, and the mountains would have like form natural land borders typically, and they'd have mines, and mines are very valuable, and valuable things nations fight over. So like you sort of even just kind of where you place things will sort of tell you a little bit about how the neighbors get along.
Right. You have loot for the lowlands are loot for monsters and armies, and the mountains are loot
That's
for
a great way to put it.
players.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And then the hills are basically everything in between. And to some degree, all terrain types are going to be a mixture of these different elements. And you put them pretty beautifully here. So lowlands, we have like a 10% chance of a. I love the way that you put these. I love the individual elements, landmarks on the map that you've introduced to people in the campaign to make sure that they get kind of like the basic is the wrong word. I'm going to use it for the moment. Basic elements included, because a campaign without quarries, mines, or farmable land, I think is missing something really substantial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to know where kind of it's first off it's quick to generate the way I have it here. So if you're pretty much just rolling on your hexes, you're just doing it really quick, and being that it's so quick to generate, it tells you so much. Like you get a lot of bang for your buck on that.
Mm-hmm. Like let's just start with, okay, I have a 10% chance of a quarry, 10% chance of a mine, 90%. I roll for each of these, right?
Yeah, each of those. So I usually use roll under. So it'd be like if you roll a 10 or under, that'd be you have a quarry. If you roll a 10 or under, you have a mine.
All right, let's try it out. I got a D100 macro here. All right, so I have a 90. All right, so that's definitely not. No quarry.
No quarry.
Let's try second roll. We have no mine. And we have no farmland either.
No farm.
So something you described later was, hey, by the way, lowlands is also where potentially it's the most likely to have tracts of arable land for the growing of crops and pasturing of animals. The breadbasket of nations will be located in these areas, but swamps might fall here alternatively. So if we have a place that has no quarry, no mine, and no farmable land, I think we have a new terrain type. Or not necessarily a new terrain type, just, hey, this place is also wet and verdant, but it's probably overrun by monsters.
Yeah. It having nothing tells you something.
Yeah. If you get a result of, we've been doing it with Dungeon 24, if I roll on the encounter table, or if I roll on inhabitation, regardless of whether or not I use the D20 or the D100, for that lovely table in Appendix B for inhabitation, there's still, in both of those cases, there's a chance to get nothing, uninhabited. And if it's uninhabited, then I get to roll for some random encounters instead. And if I roll for some random encounters, that's definitely something I can use, especially if there's a village or castle or city nearby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is sort of like this little kind of like system kind of gets you started, because it's like you'll be able to it's the barest that tells you what works, and then you can kind of like, once you play with it a little bit, you kind of find your sea legs, then maybe you can kind of make some tweaks or adjustments or something like that, as far as, because it is a very general system. Or if you can look at you can evaluate sort of like a published system and say whether or not it is going to work, like if it's robust enough to even generate a world.
I think one of the most fascinating things, and this ties into our previous room, which is one of the reasons why I put our local vampires wargaming club in this particular room. You can tell that this is the convention one based on the rough size of it. Is that you explicitly state, and this is why I was kind of annoyed at the treasure section. You explicitly state when it comes to the mines that, hey, you should consider like a gold mine to be worth about 2 dungeons worth of gold, income, resources. I thought that was brilliant. the idea that, because most people are completely disconnected from this, that the idea behind treasure is not to simulate the value of a medieval peasant's life or worth. The idea that he spends an entire year working for a single gold, right, and that encompasses his life. No, the purpose of gold in a game is to bear some relation to other resources that you could purchase. So, like in my game, Chilmus Valley, the treasure tables are based loosely off of, what is it? The CR of the challenge rating of a treasure table or of a hoard of treasure is based off of, or is meant to compare to a unit of infantry, the cost of a unit of infantry. And the magic item tables are similarly developed. So if I have if the value of a health potion is 50 gold pieces, and infantry, like regular human infantry, are roughly 500 gold pieces as far as cost goes, then what that tells you is that a health potion, and we'll say that infantry is, regular human infantry is 20 guys. Then that means that a health potion being worth 1/10 of a unit means that a health potion is worth 2 men at arms. It costs 50 gold. 50 gold will get you 2 men at arms for regular human infantry. And that's the price of a health potion. So what you've done when it comes to the mines is express that in terms of national resources, domain level assets.
Mm-hmm.
How much should somebody focus on this?
Sorry, cut off for a second. I thought you were waiting for me. Go ahead.
I've been rambling for a while, so go ahead.
Yeah, because it's so. First off, there's almost no support for domain level in kind of most of sort of the mainstream systems, or at the very least, even if there is, it's not like taken seriously. I've never me not knowing about it would, if it does exist, kind of says something too. Because I am plugged into these things. And so like people, because I remember it used to be like a big debate in like 3.5 with like people talk about like how to do recurring income, and and it was like people had like him and haw, and it got like pretty tense sometimes because like the players would try to game the economy, and really like what it boils down to is like if they're making so much gold they don't adventure, or they don't need to adventure, like that's kind of a fail state. And so you really kind of can make your make your income like sort of in relation to the actual game, and the dungeon is kind of the game at the end of the day.
Right.
And the dungeon, and obviously the dungeon is very broad in its scope and concept. It's not exactly just going down underground. A city can be a dungeon. Like political intrigue can kind of be a dungeon, or could involve dungeons. So yeah, that's kind of my where I kind of fall on that, and that's what I was trying to do, is like kind of help people have some sort of standard to peg it to, and that might be sort of like the accountant in me, kind of like kind of how I operate, like when I'm like trying to figure out my balance sheet and like what to like do all that stuff. But so that sort of like that was kind of what I trying to help people square that circle was what I was trying to do, and so I'm glad to hear that it helps sort of put things in perspective.
Right. You're not just tossing numbers out on the thing and like, oh, that's a high number. That's
right.
The big concern when you tell people, make sure that you're being reasonable. When you give the caveats of be reasonable when you're handing out treasure, is you get people who look at that and say, oh man, they got like 3 magic items in 3 sessions. Oh my god. I gotta cut down on this. We gotta go back to the copper standard. And because they don't really understand because they don't have a target goal, they have no reference for what a good haul actually is. Which you sort of have provided in the back of the book, now that I think about it, by way of the training costs and such. Yeah.
Yeah. I tried to have like a training like kind of a very generalized like training cost thing. Obviously, it's very much inspired by first edition,
Right.
kind of, but I've kind of like I generalized a few things, I simplified some things, and I kind of don't really say like definitely do this. It's really sort of an example of kind of how you could do it. The idea is it should just be it should be expensive.
Mhm.
Like if I had to summarize that entire section of trading costs is make it expensive. I would say it because make it expensive and time consuming, and it feels like it's worth it because they should get enough value out of the new level to make up for the cost. Is the way I see it.
Right. That's a good target number, especially because you're coming from Pathfinder. I'm coming from 5th edition. You're coming from Pathfinder, where you do get a lot of cool stuff throughout that game. Your levels provide you almost everything.
Yeah.
Pathfinder 2nd edition. Oh man, I really want to. If I do any conventional gaming after this at all, it's going to be a Pathfinder 2nd edition. But I like the idea that you've put. Okay, so you have these here. Your thesis statement is we're going to make it expensive. We're going to make it purposeful, and we're going to make it time consuming because it's going to make the players feel like it's worth it once they get the new thing. It's been percolating in my mind. Is there a dynamic there where the players does the same dynamic play out if the players sort of limp over the finish line to getting XP for the next level and just barely have enough money to cover their training costs? Or does that really only happen if the players have gotten a pretty good score that carries them to some degree over? Right? They're clear of their limits.
It can kind of go both ways, and even sometimes I've had players sort of limp over, like they kind of maybe got a big score, but it wasn't enough, and they spent a bunch of money, and then they kind of got like a smaller score picked over, and just are like, oh crap, I only have like just enough to pay for the level, and then I'm broke.
Mm-hmm.
What that does is that's actually good. That's actually really really good because the costs are not necessarily. It's not like first off you're simulating something, right? So in this case, like what are we simulating? We're simulating the gaining of expertise through mentorship, at least for the first 10 levels or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're sort of growing on your own. When you're dealing at the end of the day, training costs are you're dealing with a person, an NPC. You can ask those NPCs for favors. You can ask for loans. You can ask for, even if they're like, oh, I don't have enough money. It's like, well, I mean, they'll train you, but you're gonna have to do something for them.
Yeah, the questing. It's literally already built into the system that, okay, if you would like to get past oh, absolutely. Full Metal Dragon, I absolutely like Pathfinder 2nd edition. Not enough that I've switched to it as of yet, but to be honest with you, I'm intimidated by that system, but I'm going to humble myself before the wonderful designers at Paizo, because they've created something that's clearly beyond my understanding at first, and I'm just going to have to sit down and learn. It's going to be a wonderful experience. But everything that you just said reminds me of the inclusion of, right, we've included fail states, we've encouraged this recurring reminder that something needs to be done in order to actually progress inside of the game. You can't just take over the line. You can't just count up the number and say, finally I got it. There's still going to be an interruption to whatever your plans were at that moment. It feels to me like the purpose of mines, quarries, and tractable land is to do that on the domain scale. To say to the players who have acquired a mine, a quarry, or something else that's useful, to say, okay, somebody else now wants that resource. This is making a lot of money, it's very valuable, but somebody else wants it, and so it's going to interrupt your plans. You're going to have to recalibrate. And all of these campaign events seem like they're intended to just force the players to recalibrate within the campaign and, to some degree, make it fresh again. Was this intentional, or did you have something else in mind, like what we've been discussing so far, when you developed recommendations on these different interruptions?
So it's the deer analogy is sort of the thing that I kind of had in my mind, kind of doing all these things. So everything needs to be turned toward the kind of you're trying to create sort of a content generation machine because you're also trying to like defeat burnout.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have like all of these ticks and these triggers that can that sort of bring out the things that you're trying to get your players to do, like you're trying to draw action out of your players. All of the things I tried to lay out are the things that I think will do that. So it's like if they need money, they're going to try to get more money. If they get that money, now they're going to have to defend it, and defending it, they might have to like make some like every sort of like every sort of step in that thing is like you're saying is pulling them to kind of like the next item of the day. In that way, they can never really relax. It's like they might have infinity money, and now they have now they're dealing with like assassins like every single day, and somebody's going to get like a lucky strike in one time, or they're dealing with thieves. They're dealing with like just kind of just rank corruption, and like in their court, and people like, oh, it turns out like I have like 500,000 gold pieces. Well, actually, you have like 30,000 because your treasurer embezzled all of it and fled to another country. And then like that's a problem, and so that kind of like that spurs action. I recently, it's not so recent anymore. This was like a year or two ago. A player was sitting on 2 gold mines, like of very high purity, so he's drawing in a very large income. The kind of the state church showed up with their hands out and said, "Hey, we noticed you haven't been tithing," and and which was funny for him, or rather me, and he started kind of doing that, and then his neighbors started making up all these things like, well, actually that land was in my family for generations, you don't actually hold it legally, your liege who gave it to you stole it 3 generations ago, here I have the deed, and so now you have all these people like trying to invent like what is it? Cast, like I don't know. I've read this word more than said it, but casus belli, like reasons for war. So there was actually like a little bit of an internecine struggle where kind of the neighboring countess kind of rallied her troops together and had a big old army of like 500 or 600 people march over and was going to try to like take his castle from him and sort of forcibly integrate him into her domain. And so he kind of had to kind of raise the army, and he basically spent like most of his treasury kind of improving his defenses. He ended up winning. What a
fascinating idea!
But it was sort of yeah, right, exactly.
Ooh.
So
they just sort of made. I don't know if you saw a recent Roland Bowman's appearance, but that's kind of the idea. Is all of these different activities are going to every point of acquiring success is going to drag you back down a little bit to chase you back upwards. Bring you back far down just enough that like. You're fearing failure. You're fearing going broke or losing your castle, losing your army, losing your magic or your party members, or just access to NPCs that you find vital. And every time you get chased, that kick in the butt sort of chases you back upwards. And it feels like this book gives you the target for what upwards means. Whereas conventional campaigns are just very much focused on constantly kicking you in the butt.
Yeah. It's like everything is sort of tilted toward like I'm trying to generate that content. So the DM, I'm trying to get the players to generate that content for the DM, sort of pull their creative weight.
It's good. It's like the story of the. It's so. This is the other wonderful thing. Okay, all right. I'm going to save that for a moment. We've spent quite a few turns inside this room now. I have to ask, where would you like to go next?
I'm gonna go farthest west.
Over there. There are 2 passages.
And then go south.
And then south. All right, that's fine. So this is just a passage, so we're just going to continue our little interrogator for like the next 5 minutes for a moment. Something you bring up in the chat pretty often is how how easy it is to just draw from real life. And as you were describing the issue with the neighboring count, and the neighboring government sort of inventing reasons for war and inventing reasons, well, somebody fell out of compliance, so now I'm going to demand fealty, or I'm going to demand your, yeah, as soon as people find out you're wealthy, I'm going to demand your fealty or your resources or some other advantage that only you could provide me right now. There's so many examples of this in real life. I'm getting distracted by that little red marker. It's being... That internet's misbehaving. The internet's really misbehaving. You are making me nervous. There we go. Okay, it's going back up. Alright, sorry about that. I was thinking about that one story of a Chinese constable, like before this was... No, it was China. It was a Chinese constable who, like, was in charge of transporting some prisoners. He's a sheriff, basically. He's in charge of transporting prisoners, and the punishment for prisoners escaping your charge was death. So a bunch of prisoners escaped. He went over to go find them. He couldn't find them, and he looked at the rest of the prisoners and said, well, we're all gonna die. But if you follow me, I'll be your new lord. And he basically that was his path to literally becoming an emperor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's turning around. That's called turning around a bad situation.
Mm-hmm. Now, how essential did it? Oh, Amber Alert. Where's that? Nope. How essential do you think these either real life parallels or these real life grounded? You could say real life parallels, or you could say like narrative parallels. If somebody reads this in Conan or Nine Princes in Amber, it's probably going to be just as effective. How critical do you think these are to the campaign? To describe campaign elements in a way that's basically ripping off your favorite stuff, or your favorite histories, or your favorite literature. Go.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's like if you like, I want whoever's reading it to have the time to pursue the parts of the game, like the GM to develop the parts of the game they enjoy. So if it's like you want to have like some Dune type thing where you have like a glossary of terms, like that's cool. I wouldn't recommend it for pretty much most people, because first off, players don't really care about that too much. They might you might have one or two that are so like interested in the lore, I guess, of your world, but they're not generally going to be super interested especially if it's like something you're just really hell bent on making it like alien. So if you have something that's sort of vaguely recognizable, so it's like I have like my kingdom of, it's got like 9th, 11th century England. That the people, everybody kind of knows what the score is, and the things that are most interesting and the things that draw them in are the parts, like, or sort of like how the thing, like events play out inside of that. I just got like a notification and I thought I turned everything off. Or how the parts actually like play out inside of that that milieu. So if you're running everything in real life is like, it just provides the backdrop. The real thing, the real interesting parts is the drama that plays out like inside of the backdrop, because those are unique to the players. Those are unique to the Those are the parts that are unique to the campaign. It's not like they're not going to care if your king is called like some like unique term or something like that.
Right. If he has like it's fine to just give somebody like to just call somebody King Arthur if you want to. Your archfey can be called Oberon, and your hunter god can be Orion, and it's fine. The thing that they're going to be interested in is when Oberon attacks King Arthur. That's what's going to freak them out. And then if you go into literature or your favorite narratives or to history to figure out, okay, why would somebody do this? Well, I'm going to use a conflict between the Picts and the the Normans. Oh, I found this detail about a conflict between the Picts and the Normans, and that's going to be the thing that I tell the players, set this powder keg off. Then that's going to give them maybe a hook for adventure, and if they bite, that's good. Maybe it's good. Yeah, if they bite, it's good. Show some investment, and you can keep running along with that historical parallel. But if they don't bite, there's still the war to take care of. And so the game is still going to happen.
Yeah, right.
Would it be fair to say that you've constructed your advice here? Yeah, goddamn it. All right, this is a leading question. I promise no more. Would it be fair to say that you've constructed your advice in a way that makes sure that people have the maximum tools, going back to the deer analogy, the maximum number of tools coming out of every prepped activity, right? Every time they prepare for the campaign, using your advice, they're going to have the maximum number of tools to use in the campaign, even if they don't use all of them.
Yes, that's like right, exactly. So like the whole goal. So I would say I think a good ratio that I think I about hit myself is for about an hour of work, which would be, and I consider adjudicating downtime actions, sort of deciding what to do there, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe like prepping a few kind of NPCs every now and then. An hour of work gets me about 4 hours of play.
Okay.
And that's sort of I think that's a good ratio, or at the very least a good goal. Like maybe even if it's not like perfect like that, like you want to get more play than the work you put in is the goal here. Because the idea is like you're able to invest the time in the parts that you enjoy. You're not having to like, I'm not having to sit there and have like, my like ridiculous like Charlie Day quest board of like all these like all of these things of paperwork and NPCs and predicting threads and massaging like the PC's plot into like my grand of quote unquote. It's not. That's not the point. That's not what I'm after. You're like I'm trying to fit you with the tools to where you can you're not going to burn out, because you're going to burn out on if you're doing stuff you really hate all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, where would you like to progress?
Well, I'm at the end of the hallway. I might as well.
Okay. So, we have a boss inside this dungeon. We have a vampire here, and I've just rolled a 6, so it's definitely going to be a fight. Crap, I have to invent something to fight with you on. You mentioned something in the beginning of the game. No, you mentioned in your book, you tell people that the big bad evil guy is not going away. It's not going the way of the dodo. It's still going to sort of appear in the campaign. It's just not going to be the person that you spend the most time on. It's not going to be the NPC that you invest the most time on or stat out all their gear and such. The players are going to tell you who they hate the most, right? And I wish I didn't have to fight you on this one, because it's just obviously correct. So I'm gonna have to invent some. Oh, I could just invent some conventional play examples. What about?
You can misrepresent. You can misrepresent it.
I could.
I interrupted your train of thought. Sorry.
What about all the? No, you were right. But here's what I'm going to go with. What about all of the fun, not just narrative moments, because narrative is not the full story here. It really is a full thread of adventure that the players can yank on. The more personalized, the more experienced, the more telegraphed a big bad evil guy is, the more they can sort of take advantage of it to. The more characterized that guy is, rather than some random orc chief out in the woods. If they know that the local vampire here has lost his wife and he's trying to resurrect his wife, or he's trying to recreate his wife in some capacity, the they have more levers to pull on. Shouldn't one NPC at the very least get a little bit more attention? If it's important, here's my question. If it's so important to make sure that the engine gets started, right? You compare the campaign to a muscle that needs to be flexed over and over again, which is fantastic. If that's the case, isn't the big bad evil guy kind of the starter? Isn't he your backstory option? Where the players are saying, I want to kill this guy, and I want to get this magic item, and my character wants to do this. They find this most important. Isn't the big bad evil guy that, but for you, the GM? Go.
Yeah, and you, so it's like you can sort of introduce like regional villains, like national villains, world villains, like that sort of thing. Like however you can do that. But as I still wouldn't say that they should be the focus, because if you could pull it off, again, it's a lot of conventional play relies on if you can pull it off, if you have like the talent, and that is not. I am trying to maximize tables here, and you're. In the beginning, I think a small regional villain, the Orc Chief in the Woods, is fine. I think your players will be intimidated by them. Like my players were intimidated by like the Goblin Chief because he was just kind of like sufficiently vicious, And he's a goblin. He's a little bit tougher than other goblins, but he's still a goblin. And so there is a certain level of like. Your players will sort of ascribe value to the things you put in front of them. So if you could do the big bad evil guy, but like I'm sorry, like I've read the forums, I've seen the horror stories, and it's like a lot of the time you'll introduce like this big villain, and the players like won't care about them, and you can't be. It's very easy to be insulted over that because like you're saying, if you're considering them, this is my character, this is the one I'm putting in the game, and they don't care about them, well, they must not care about me. And I think that's a lot of the I think that's a headspace like some people kind of get into, and it's just like I don't know why you would kind of do that to yourself. So if you get like, let's say the campaign like, goes on a sufficiently long time. Let's say the campaign goes on a sufficiently long time. There are sort of like they like no sort of unifying evil has emerged like organically, then yeah, like you're probably going to want to introduce like, oh yeah, actually there was this like psychotic mage out in the woods, and yeah, he's formed an army or whatever. Like I have I posted about this a little bit, but I gave a player a cyber lich, and the cyber lich is like inventing like horrible plague spells, zombie plague spells, and that has sort of come to fruition, and my players in my game are now sort of having to with the fact that these like exploding glowworm zombies are like infecting like whole areas of the kingdom they're in. So like that's a big deal to them, and they're very invested. They're like, we have to take care of this guy, and they have had no sort of build up to him like whatsoever, but they're having a blast like trying to figure out like where the hell all this is coming from. So and they've been fine kind of going dungeon to dungeon. So this is sort of now it's gotten to the point where this regional catastrophe is sort of a unifying force for them. But to sit there and be like, from the beginning, I'm going to thread you along and pull you by the nose until like you sort of agree to fight my big bad evil guy.
Right.
I don't know. You're setting yourself up for a lot of heartache. I think more often than not.
It'd be as if because you ask your players, what loot do you want? Who do you want to kill? What do you want to do? And it would be like if you asked your players that and then didn't do any of that. If you asked your players these questions about things that they wanted, you invited them to have an ego investment in your campaign, and then intentionally avoided it, or maybe unintentionally avoided it, right? You just didn't care enough to do it. You just didn't. You asked people to make an ego investment in your campaign, and then for some reason did not indulge the ego investment of the campaign, whatever reason that is. That would feel bad to your players. So, sounds like what your recommendation is, don't do that to yourself by telling the players what your ego investment in the campaign is. This is my big bad evil guy, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, and they might not want to do it, and it's sort of like their prerogative. So, and, it feels like it does kind of sometimes can feel forced. Like like I said, if you're good at it, go for it. But like not everybody's good at it. And like that's not knocking anybody. Like people have different strengths. Like that's fine.
If anything, we're a little bit tired of people who are good at it. We kind of just want people to be able to sit down at a game and run. Because we have way too many. We don't have enough DMs. We have way too many players, and it kind of seems like the DMs are intentionally cutting. It seems like there's a guild of DMs who are intentionally keeping the number low and don't want anybody who's inexperienced, quote inexperienced, anybody who hasn't been playing for 40 years to run a decent game.
Yeah, and and again, there's a lot of personal investment for them too, because if you tell them like, oh, like actually your way doesn't iterate, like you're okay, we're gonna try this way now. They don't like, they take that personally. There's not really much to be done about it. I don't know, like in my own my IRL like friendships, like I said, I have a kind of a connected table, and he was even like, he had to put his game down because like he had his second kid and had 3 jobs. So he's like, all right, I literally have time to eat and sleep. So, but the 3 jobs became 2 jobs, and now he's he's like, oh, I have plenty of time to run this type of game. He's like, he told his players, he's like, look, I can run a game like this because it's easy for me, and they have a table again. And I'm pretty pleased with that. So yeah,
that's awesome. This also reminds me of reminds me a little bit of the claims around the Matt Mercer effect, which I always felt bad about because I think Matt Mercer's game is fucking awesome, but I don't think that the I think that Matt Mercer's game is awesome, but I think it's awesome for a lot of reasons that people miss. I think, don't get me wrong, it would be entertaining to watch Laura Bailey, Travis Willingham, Matt Mercer, Liam O'Brien, everybody talk in any game that they were playing or any activity that they were playing because they're voice actors. They'd be fun to hang out with in literally any context. But when I look at Matt Mercer's game, I genuinely want to play in that game because there's cool magic items and artifacts being dumped out the wazoo. Right, because players are questing for them and nearly dying for them. There's a genuine threat of death in those games, so much as people want to call it scripted. I don't think people have gone down way too many, or actually died in those campaigns way too many times for that to be the case, I think. That's my bias. But, and there's cool, like, faction interactions going on. The players are like, sure, there's no mass combat system in 5th edition, but people are not... But in, for instance, the first campaign of Critical Role, it's the Vox Machina campaign. They're going back and forth to find allies that can help them fight against the dragon that's taken over their hometown. Yeah. That's taken over their domain. And so that's still kind of like... there's a sense of things are being fulfilled in this campaign that I don't have access to in the base campaign. And gosh, wouldn't it be nice if you could run a game that was full, that matched the full breadth and depth of the fantasy milieu without needing an arts degree.
Yeah. So I think I haven't watched Critical Role in several. I think I watched like most of, or I listened. I listened on like podcast form, like a radio play, in like campaign 1, most of that, and I kind of fell off. But like that's the thing. I don't know. I think it got kind of the apex of its popularity, and then people kind of like they bandwagon on the hate train, and I kind of like. No, I kind of respect. Like I said, I respect the hustle. I respect. Like they've done something, like they're unquestionably talented in what they've done. So yeah, but like the thing is with the Critical Role guys though, it's like, and I think as far as like kind of holding them up as an example to sort of kind of, let's say, common tables, is they make a lot of money and are able to spend full-time hours working on this camp. Like Matt Mercer makes his money doing this, makes good,
Right.
and he's very it's very, and he can dedicate a work week to kind of being a DM that way, and he could do this for 8 years and not burn out.
He could
I
afford to
have a career.
stumble. Yeah. He can afford to make stuff that won't
Right.
necessarily get used or might be counterproductive even, because on balance across a 40-hour work week, it's going to turn into something pretty amazing.
Yeah, and he's got there's a whole team of producers that are able to sort of set up his table props for him. Everybody's able to kind of move their miniatures around. It's all it's a very high production thing. There's a lot of people, a lot of salaries get paid on Critical Role.
Mhm.
So that's kind of why I don't. It's like I said, I respect it as an entertainment product. I'm not. But it's not. That's why I don't. If you're trying to make your game like that, I'm like that's not. I don't think that's a productive use of your time, and I don't think it's fair to yourself to ask that of yourself for
Yeah.
free in between making kind of working the hustling yourself and whatever it is that you do.
And to your point, how are you going to know what actually makes what part of that is good gaming and what part of Critical Role is good gaming and what part of it is entertaining on account of the people there and what part of Critical Role is entertaining or enjoyable or seems like a good experience by way of you not being there, right? How are you going to separate, distill all these individual
you don't know what's on the
elements
back end,
for your campaign? Yeah,
right? Right, exactly. So yeah, it's like people if you get some people get kind of really upset about Critical Role's existence. I think that's sort of missing the point too. And it's sort of so I think some things are sort of objectively right and wrong, but that it's in this that's not exactly something. It's just different. I don't really think they're comparable. Like trying to run a campaign for you and your friends and this
yeah,
kind of multi-million-dollar entertainment product.
yeah. I do. But again, I've really cherry picked very specific elements that I find interesting about the game, and make me think that I would enjoy
Sure.
playing in it. Like if I was going to play in a Vox Machina video game, this is the stuff I would like to experience in that video game. So I just take that because video games have real designers nowadays, and tabletop games don't. So I just take the things that I would expect with the real designers, and start putting that in a tabletop game, and that lets me smile upon Critical Role. Alrighty, where, my
Yeah,
friend,
sure.
would you like to move
If
next?
whatever. Yeah.
You can finish. You can absolutely finish your thought, or continue talking about anything. This is just a
Oh,
format that I've picked to help me keep moving along. If you want to stick on anything, you are free to do so.
I appreciate it. Yeah, no, this is cool. I'm enjoying this. I'm gonna go up to the northeast. Head in. Oh, this just puts us back. Okay. No extra doors.
I mean, there could be something in there.
I'll go back that way, and then I'll try to investigate that other hall.
Okay, I'm going to pause you here. Our subject for this particular passage is railroading, because you're going to run into a teleport trap that I decided was there a moment ago. But before I teleport you to the new destination, I'd like to ask, what do you think the advantages are? Just we know that railroading is the bad word, but because it's the bad word and people overuse it in context where, and people overuse it in context, people overuse the term railroading in context where really it would apply to their own campaign, but they just kind of all experiences that they didn't enjoy and were also railroading, and then they don't refer to experiences that they enjoyed but were railroading. They don't refer to those as railroading. And as a result of, there's probably a little bit of a pendulum swing nowadays where people say, well, what's the quote from Mac Colville? Well, roller coasters are on rails and everybody loves those. So taking that question honestly, how does the living campaign fare when compared against the railroad?
So, I think when, like you said, it's like railroad is somewhat overused because it basically means, I think people use it to mean like any time sort of like a certain set of circumstances happens, and it's like, no, that's not always the case. Like sometimes you set like events in motion and like things are just sort of going to happen after that, and there's not really much you can do, depending. Maybe you get really creative, like I don't know. um but in this case, like the railroad is kind of explicitly trying to hamstring player agency by, you know um maybe, let's say this teleport trap, maybe it wasn't there when we started the dungeon, but now it is, because like, well, uh I wasn't supposed to double back. I was supposed to keep going forward, so now you're gonna teleport me into the room I was supposed to go in.
Right.
Like that's like, so like maybe you're able to sell it as sort of like, oh man, like that's some crazy circumstance, wow, and the players might believe it, once or twice. But you're going to slip up eventually. Like
Yeah.
you're like your facial expression is going to betray you. You're going to slip up and be like, oh man, so yeah, I knew you guys would go in there. You're not, you're going to give the illusion, you're going to give the game up, and then you're going to kind of have to explain yourself, and your players are, they're not going to forget that. It sort of hurts like kind of long-term investment, because campaigns, I don't think there's any kind of like singular event that kills a campaign. It's sort of like an accumulation of failures that it just sort of gets like, it fizzles out over time.
Yeah. A muscle atrophying, or to any of your examples, a muscle atrophying or an engine breaking down from not enough maintenance and taking too many dings as time goes on.
Yeah, yeah.
It's unfortunate
Because like
because,
as a young man, I was sort of like, I'd enter a job, and I kind of continually had these issues where I would sort of fall out of favor with kind of management, and and I'd be like, well, that's because they're stupid. It's because of this, and there was a whole lot of things where I'd say like it's all kind of their fault. And I remember one of my buddies, like I was like, all right, I'm just gonna like head out early. He goes, you want to be in leadership, but you keep like trying to leave early. And I was
mm,
like, that really kind of rocked me back on my heels, because I couldn't argue with it because he was right. Like I realized like every single time anybody asked me to do something or something like that, like asked for help, I would constantly. And I realized like my career failures were sort of an accumulation of like little things that were things I didn't do, or things that I did have control over that I neglected because I just wanted to go home and play video games or something.
yeah.
And that was really, like, I'm really glad he did, because that was the lesson I kind of took, and when I, or like how to run a campaign. It is an accumulation of failures, and you're like, if I keep my campaigns keep fizzling, you really got to like examine it. Like, is it something that I'm doing that I'm not realizing that I'm doing, and is it, is it an accumulation of absurdities, maybe even? So yeah,
Yeah. That's how
so
you
yeah,
described it
that's
in the
like, that
book.
was a little bit of a rambly story, but yeah.
That's a fantastic example because it is these literal ways. It's a literal parallel example, one to one, if you will, of letting people down in small ways that accumulate over time and connected for a moment. Give me a sec. There we are. Okay, I'm gonna restart my sentence there. It is so distracting to see that little red bar. I'm just gonna put my chat window over it so I don't look at it. Full Metal Dragon says, once the illusion is broken, it's hard to get it back. That's correct. Let's see here. Hoisin asked a question
Mhm.
earlier about, I adjust my hex size based on how big my world is. Does the system have a way to accommodate changes in hex size map scale? I'll let you answer that.
I don't really think it's
I guess that's not
I
important.
don't really think it's contingent. Yeah, like, because like hex size, I mean, hex size is interesting, and I'm sure there's probably some sort of like real effect depending on like what your hex size is. But yeah, no, it whatever your hex size you pick, that's sort of like the generation would be sort of it's predominantly what would be in that hex. So if it's like you have a 12-mile hex and you get lowlands, there might be a few hills, there might be some sort of like, but it's going to be, that hex is going to be mostly lowlands in those 12 miles. It might be 8 miles of
Yeah.
lowlands or whatever. So it really kind of depends on like it. I don't think it's really contingent on size. It's really sort of a guidepost, and it will help you kind of figure out where your resources are. Like the important part is figure out where the resources are.
Mhm.
Adjust it how you will.
It's a chunk. A hex is either a chunk of content or it is a package of chunks of content. Right. So if I'm using 24
Yeah.
mile hexes, it's because I have a package of 6 mile hexes, which are chunks of content, and that's how I choose to place them. Yeah. Going back to your example, I'm gonna. Yeah. Now I have a chance to like sort of re-spool here. I think it was a wonderful example, 1-to-1, if you will, of how people will accumulate these tiny, tiny little failures over time, and they weigh on the people around them. And in an attempt to make up for these tiny failures, people will chase greater and greater experiences, greater highs, greater individual moments of positive energy, positive relation, a general upward trajectory or signals for an upward trajectory that they're hoping will cancel out the negative experiences. Every time the person does the quantum ogre, that accumulates one little absurdity or negative experience that counts against their emotional balance at the table. But every time the quantum ogre works out well, it's like a really positive experience, and they're hoping that the positive experience then goes into the bank, and that's not how human relationships work at all. Your
Not
little
at all. No.
Yeah, your little mistakes are what's important. Nobody cares what you did right. They only care what you fucked up. They only care what you messed up.
Yeah, and because the reason is, it's like, wow, like the quantum ogre really worked that time. No, like it's not a positive. Okay, you made the game work the way it was supposed to. It's actually neutral. So it doesn't actually it doesn't affect the kind of the overall balance sheet of the players. But like when you do something that makes the game not work well, okay, that is actually negative. So it's neutral negative. The positives are kind of the rewards for like things as they happen. So it's like really like kind of the players are kind of supposed to be generating their own positives. It's really like that's kind of how I see it, I guess.
Yeah.
Is like it's like the
there are times that you
the positives are the parts where the players.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I think you were going to kind of bring it home for me.
So there are times where you get in the player's way, and that's negative. And then there are times where you either don't get in their way, or it feels like you didn't get in their way, right? You pulled off the quantum ogre in a way that it feels like you didn't get in their way that time. And that's not positive. Mm-hmm. That's just neutral, to your point.
Right. Perfect. Yes. That's where I was trying to get to.
Yeah. And then player-generated content, the threads that they generate. It's why domain play is wonderful. I keep having this argument over and over again with people who are just too stupid to live or understand to understand my gaming hobby, and are not fit for my ivory tower. But they don't. No matter how many times you tell them, hey, it's okay if people aren't invested, if not everybody at the table is invested in domain play, because the one person who is invested at domain play, if you just have one person who really likes crafting magic items, or really likes domain play, or really likes going out into the woods and hex crawling, or really loves airships, right? And then you have a fifth player who really likes trains, and that's not necessarily relevant to the campaign, but it's probably the person making this objection, so we're going to put that to the side for the moment. It's okay if one person is really invested in a mode of play compared to everybody else, because their investment generates adventure material that's unique to the player. And so the other players at the table get to lean on this new leader's investment to carry them through the campaign and have more fun. So it's not just going through a dungeon, it's going through the dungeon that will save John's castle.
Right. Yeah, so I have a player, and like to your point, is always one. And in both my campaigns, with both two different groups of players. They do not know each other. Okay, so like I have local friends, I have friends who are further away. There is one player in both of those that has taken on a noble role, and in my online one in particular is very funny, because he's the only one that's like was interested in it. He's been just slowly developing his domain, and the others keep coming out and hitting him up for cash, like domain problems, and they keep trying to charge him out in the nose to like pay them. It's really funny. But like it turns into like a character moment where they're like, I'll do it for this, and he's like trying to hardball them, and it's like it's kind of like nasty negotiations, but all in character, of course. Like everybody's having a good time, but pretty funny, and like they're just trying to, and in that way, the players that don't have a recurring income are siphoning off income for themselves. So,
right, God, that's hilarious, and it's
very funny. It's very.
Domain problems. Well, what the hell am I going to do with the Sphere of Annihilation? It's like, well, you don't have to do anything except maybe sell it to your buddy who would very much like it. And has a keeps full of gold.
Right.
Alrighty, so I'm now going to
exactly.
teleport you to one of the places that I think helps tie a lot of what we've been talking about together so far together. So I'm just gonna. You're teleported to a room with an hourglass. This is where the vampire keeps his time. Would you like to talk about timekeeping in tabletop RPGs? Since for some reason we cannot get away from it. Be arguing about this until the end of time.
And in some ways, we probably always will. But yeah, like time. So timekeeping. So I'm on record as saying that I believe 1-to-1 is the best. I think and the way I define best is usability, accuracy, iteration. And I probably actually not necessarily in that order because I put iteration at the top.
Right.
It's very easy to explain to somebody, sit to somebody down and explain to them how a calendar works because they know how a calendar works. And especially, it's much easier even to explain to them how our calendar works because they should be aware of that already. So This is like, that's why I like one-to-one, and it's like I've seen some very talented and obviously intelligent DMs kind of like they try to do their variable times and they have like their ways that I'm sure like they keep it all straight and their players kind of are able to do all this stuff. The problem I have with that, the reason I don't think it works as well is because it's what is the iteration there? I can't is anybody being trained on how to do that? How would you train somebody on how to do that?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, I haven't really, nobody else really does it this way, and no, like I can't, it's very difficult for me to teach it, then like that actually speaks to some deficiencies that with regard to things that I care about, which namely
like that person's character. They're a bad person. No, seriously. Seriously. If you get somebody who says, well, I just do strict timekeeping. I don't move things forward at all. I just track the exact date that I just, I really cross my I's and dot my T's when I'm looking at the calendar and mark down where this person left off, and I know the exact second, and where this person came back, and I know the exact second, and we just use that to carry the campaign forward. That's great, man. It's so cool that you've been doing that for 40 years. Nobody else is doing that, and we're not even sure when you started or if you've actually been doing that for 40 years. So who cares? Everybody knows how the calendar works.
Right, and like that's the kind of the ultimate kind of point in its favor, and it's like that. I don't really know if there's like I haven't really seen like a counter argument that I think is like sufficiently refutes that, because everybody I've kind of taught it to, I've taught one-to-one to a few people now, kind of in my personal life, as well as kind of walked people through it online. They've been like more or less pretty much everybody's been able to do it, whether or not like the players have the buy-in to like do their downtime orders with regularity, like that's a different problem. But even then, I would consider it I would consider that a non, because if your players don't have if they don't have the buy-in to submit in order to like be an active participant in the campaign, they were never going to be an active participant in the campaign. It's not, they don't get to, like, before it was just them reacting to a narrative and kind of eating up the content that you provide them, and that's actually like not good for you in the long run. And like that player is sort of like kind of a net negative on your ability to sort of maintain the game for any extended period of time. They're just kind of
assuming they don't have some other really counterbalancing some other really counterbalancing advantage to make use of. Like, maybe they're not giving downtime orders that often. I have players like this. I got fucking 5e players that I'm recruiting here, and they get 1-to-1 time instantaneously, despite the massive onboarding costs of, hey, here's all my BS homebrew that just destroys onboarding for other players. The one thing that they don't struggle with is, the calendar moves forward. But so I'll have players who are like, who don't do a lot of downtime, and they don't take a lot of advantage of actions between sessions. Sometimes they'll ask other players to do it, or other players will recommend to them, hey, we need a downtime action to accomplish XYZ goal. You there, you're not using yours, just roll this die for us, and they'll comply. But those players who are really good, who are still like a net positive on the campaign, will be really effective in the middle of the game, right? They're really good at combat, or they're really good at dungeon crawling. Or some mixture of the two. And so they'll breeze through content and act as this engine, this accelerant for other players who are more invested and maybe more long-term in your engine.
Right. And it's really like it's a way for them to be involved, to take on some of the burden. Like I've described it a few times as the players are writing your notes for you. Mm-hmm. So it frees you up. Like that is a downtime order is a GM note, but just comes from the players. So that's the kind of the big advantage of it, and that's why I push it as hard as I do, because it's just like maybe there's other ways to get that. I don't know, but they're not. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and nobody's teaching me how to do it their way. So
yeah, like I've been thinking recently about like different. There are definitely ways. Okay, so you could run a campaign that has 1-to-1 time but doesn't have time jail, for instance. That's like a possibility. I started this campaign doing that, and I stopped at some point through. I think it works. I don't think it works as well. And I've twice now made it. Technically once, but I intended to do it twice. I just didn't realize that the time jail had actually worked out fine, so that people would be able to play the next day anyways. But so twice, but really once, I've allowed people to, quote, pause time inside the dungeon. And the effect of it was just, hey, we're kind of in a bad spot for finishing this tonight, but if we play within the next week, then we'll do it. Then we'll finish up this session. We're just going to extend the amount of time that it took for... We're just going to extend your time jail, basically.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. And so I've been thinking in my head, not a ton, because I don't know what the utility of this really is. But I've just been considering in my head, okay, what would it... How would I instruct DMs in a way that they could understand this was a resource or tool they could use occasionally, and it was not like this is like an emergency backup or an active campaign where people are not going to be able to resolve things through really no fault of their own. And the game state won't change if they're able to go back a couple days later and finish out the resolution of that session. Is that... Here's an instance where that would be... Here's a way that you can rescue that situation. That's how I want to pitch it to them. But I have to do that in a way that doesn't then result in them choosing to always grab the emergency brake on their car. I want them to use the gas pedal and the brake pedal. I don't want them to use the e-brake all the time. So I have to figure out an instruction or some kind of barrier to the e-brake that doesn't do that. And so the more exceptions that you produce and the more you focus on them, sort of the less utility there is, because you don't want to drive in a situation that forces you to use your you don't want to be in a situation where you're forced to use your e-brake. You want to just be able to use the gas pedal. There's like ways to do this where maybe you say, we're going to do it by a month. Our time span is going to be a month, or our time span is going to be 1 day to 5 days, or 1 day to 7 days. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder what kind of game somebody's going to make out of this differing time scale. But it's not that there aren't necessarily other correct solutions. It's that there's a small spread of correct ways to do this. And then there are people who are just not doing it correctly at all. It's not necessarily that we think that there's only one way to play. Like, there's not one way to write a sentence. I could use 2 words, and that could be a sentence. I could go, he fell. I could choose not to use adjectives. I could choose to use a multiplicity of nouns. I could choose to make it a compound sentence. But what I can't do is start the sentence with a period. Because that's wrong. There's something about the period is not supposed to go there. The period is supposed to indicate the end of something. So if I put the period at the start of a sentence and then say, well, that's just the way I'm doing it. I'm just, I'm a writer. I'm something of an artist myself. That's just kind of how I do things. No, that's not how that works. You can't start a comic with 2 weeks earlier, because 2 weeks earlier is supposed to indicate a span of time in contradiction to an established present. And so if you start the comic or start the story with 2 weeks earlier, then there's no established present except for everything that comes after 2 weeks earlier. So it's like you started a sentence with a period, right? And so there's no one way to write a comic, but gosh, there's a lot of ways, and infinity more ways, to do something wrong. And so we're just advocating some basic rules here for what is in the boundary box of right. And so we're going to use the most obvious examples of what right is, and we don't need to apologize for it.
No, I think I think a lot of so I've noticed it is like the kind of the most vociferous pushback kind of comes from kind of the established old school guys. And I really think it kind of comes from kind of a general ignorance of kind of what maybe our age cohort and younger is dealing with. Because like a lot of them have had kind of like their group that they've played gamed with for 40 years or whatever. And that's yeah, as the meme goes. And I don't know if they really appreciate kind of just how hard it is for a lot of people to kind of have that for themselves. And those games are rough. Those games are there's a lot of rough games out there, and there's not a lot of DMs. There's an overabundance of players, and basically it seems like most DMs that kind of a contemporary game, the ones that are able to be kind of gotten, are the ones that kind of were strong-armed into doing it. Like nobody. It seems very rare for somebody to be like, yeah, I heard about DMing and I was like, I really wanted to do that. It's always, well, no one else would do it. Yeah. It's even my story. It's my story is no one else would do it, so I did it. And I'm in a situation now where I've gamed with the same guys for 15 years, and there's 5 of us, and 4 of us are DMs. So now it's like we've all kind of had that experience. So we're sort of like, and I realize how insulated we are from the kind of the general situation. So if I was that's why I'm like. That's why I don't really. I really think when they push back the way they do and say, well, it's worked for us, I don't see what the big deal is. I think it is kind of coming from a place of genuine. They don't They don't know what it's like, man. They don't know what it's like, and maybe I'm being too diplomatic. I don't know, but
I
like,
was gonna be even less charitable. I was gonna say it's a place of deep insecurity. Just to mention
probably
that
that
you
too.
could be doing something wrong.
Yeah,
Like, hey, that's not where the
yeah.
apostrophe goes. It's like, how?
They bust me there for 40 years. Yeah, yeah. I yeah, maybe it's a combination of things, but that's what I see. It's like when I talk about like, have you played in a 5e game with like 30 somethings and 20 somethings? Like it's not like how you described.
Yeah. They played a BX game
So
like XYZ. Like, oh, we've gone 12 sessions and nobody has leveled up. That's fine. No. No, it's not
yeah,
fine. It's
yeah,
like, well, it works for my group. It's like, all right, well, what do you mean by works? It's just such a dumb conversation to have.
yeah,
Alrighty.
yeah.
I have a
wanna
few.
move.
I've not many rooms left here.
Okay, I'm gonna move south.
All right, he is going to move south, and I do not have a token for this room.
All right.
But what I do have is a discussion of player interactions here, and a minor point of. We're gonna roll it. All right, so it's not going to be a fight, but it is kind of still a point of disagreement here. Is mapping versus theater of the mind in dungeons, dungeon procedures. I was a little bit disappointed because I did not see any mention of the space between mapping and theater of the mind that I've been trying to get people into. Because I think theater of mind. Here's my thesis statement. I think theater of the mind is a talent in the fashion and in the definition and the usage that you were describing earlier, where it's something that people can do if they can do it, but we're not concerned with talent, we're concerned with what people can replicate. I don't think that good theater of the mind experiences are something that people can replicate unless they themselves are already well suited to be good at running theater of the mind. I've been trying to push people towards...
No,
Go ahead.
I actually I can't really fight you there because I've actually I've had some people that requested that we just don't do theater of the mind because they can't get into it. So I mean I don't think you're wrong. I kind of included it because I felt like I felt like I had to, like I don't know, like I felt like it needed to be said.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I actually I can invent a struggle, but actually I don't necessarily disagree with that, actually.
Your last example of the book was pretty good. Like a character getting jumped by two thugs in an alleyway, for example, is probably going to be resolved within 2 rounds, one way or the other, and is almost definitely going to be straightforward in execution. Players are fine with this. They know as well as you do that all they're going to do is attack. If they want to perform some kind of unorthodox maneuver, they can just ask the GM about executing their idea, to which the GM can reply yay or nay. And that's a good example. Found myself thinking about a concept called zones. I made a video about this, and I wish it had taken off, but I think you really can do everything that you could do in theater of the mind, you can do in zones with 90% less of the disadvantages.
Interesting.
Do you know what I'm talking about when I talk about zones?
I actually don't.
Oh, okay. It's where you might have like a visual representation, or you might not. I guess you don't necessarily need to have a visual representation. Maybe this is a secret to good theater of the mind combat. Is actually this other thing. People are checking off all these boxes, where you have landmarks basically in a combat arena, right? You have an area of combat, and you have landmarks that you attach to player characters' actions, right? If you want to attack the orc, you have to go over by the statue. But if you want to attack the goblin, you have to go next to the door. And if you want to attack the hobgoblin, you either need to go around the wall, or you can go up to the window that lets you see through Either you need to go through the door, or you could go up to the window, and if you have a ranged weapon, you could attack through the window. And so you're still keeping these qualifiers of action and activity. You're just not measuring them exactly, and you're using visual landmarks, you're using visual landmarks as a substitute for exact measurement, because people can still attach their heads to it. And so instead of tracking movement, you're just moving from one zone to the other. And that way, if you have like objectives in combat besides kill everything, don't let the goblins take the blacksmith's daughter out the back door. Don't let the orc ring the alarm. Then the alarm becomes a zone, and over here is a different zone called the main foyer and stuff. Does that track so far?
Yeah, because it's just like it still minimizes the table props, which is kind of what we're trying to get at for ease of use, and yeah, it kind of has like a more physical representation on the table. I want to see it, but on paper I think it works. Yeah, on paper though, like I'm pretty intrigued.
Right. Yeah, I think it's easy to sell, because you could think of a situation like, okay, your example is the guy getting jumped in an alleyway by guys. What are some of the zones that you might, doing some stuff on the fly here, what are some of the zones that you would use for the alleyway combat? And what might they entail? What objectives or events might those produce?
Like you're getting jumped by two guys.
By two guys, you got an alleyway. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe like a dumpster.
Yeah. Here, you got a dumpster over this way. Then you have one street over this way, and then you have maybe a river over this way.
Right. Yeah.
But can you think of a way where that would be worth it to run in zone combat as opposed to Theater of the Mind?
Yeah, because you'd be able to just sort of set up like the general things, or at least kind of have like tokens representing it, right? Is that kind of what you're saying? Like just kind of very like quick and dirty, just throw them on the table. Don't worry about like precise drawings or anything like that, or setting up like the props. Like you're just basically just kind of having a like kind of a brief visual. Am I understanding that correctly?
Oh no, I need your help with this one, because I'm on the back foot here. I think that your alleyway example is actually really good, and I can't think of an advantage of. I'm struggling to think of one.
Oh, okay.
I need you to play devil's advocate for me, because I'm now switching to devil's advocate for Theater of the Mind. Maybe if you get into the street, there's guards there, and then the people stop jumping you. That's an easy out?
Like, I don't know, maybe trying to scale the wall for, like, maybe there's, like, things on the wall. There's maybe there's a door. Maybe there's a door in the walls, like, in the alley somewhere, like, into another building, like, it's like a side entrance.
Right. If you kill the guys there and the guards pass by, then you're the guy who killed these two people, and you've got to talk to the guards now. Maybe if you fight them, maybe if you like kick them into the water, then you can kill them, and you don't have to worry about the guards. You're just somebody who's roughed up in an alleyway.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe Zone is suffering from the exact same problem. Now I think about it as Theater of the Mind. Maybe there isn't a good solution.
I mean, it's fun to try things. Like it's like I'd have like. Yeah, this one scenario, but you'd have to see it maybe in kind of broadly, like if it broadly improves. Because if you're any simulation is not going to be perfect, and it's not going to be like perfectly immersive or anything like that. Is like you're chasing an approximation. So, and you're just pretty much going to have to be, there's certain things you're just going to have to be okay with, and you're going to have to decide if the drawbacks are sort of like the juice is worth the squeeze. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Like I could be perfectly immersed if I have all my table props, but it takes me 10 minutes to set up for a 1 or 2 round combat. And it's like, all right, well, maybe some of that kind of visual immersion is going to have to get sacrificed because we got a schedule to keep here. We're trying to keep moving.
Absolutely. All right, speaking of which, would you like to stay in this room for a little bit longer, or would you like to move on?
Let's move on. The other side of this hallway here, I missed the mushrooms or the flowers.
Here we go. Okay,
in the main hallway now, the other side.
So in here we have a little bit of a discussion, I guess, about... I don't know why that was locked. I guess in these next two rooms, really, is what I have planned. It's just different discussions of monsters. What do you think... This ties into the zone combat discussion, and it ties into the earlier discussion of skill challenges, or not skill challenges, that's the 4th edition thing, skill checks, as things, people just kind of, buttons that people kind of press because they think that means they're playing the game. What do you think people should... Do you have any practical advice for making sure that monsters and combats are playing the game and are not just kind of pressing their attack button as opposed to their skill button? Let me clarify that question. People go the opposite way of random tables and say, well, I'm going to plan out every single encounter. I'm going to make sure that all of them have narrative importance, and which I don't know how they do that. I think they're just lying. But we'll take them at face value and say that they do, over the course of 40 hours, make everything have narrative importance, and it's all just as bookish and TV-like, fit for TV as every other combat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of like, that's their virtue, is, oh, that is such a rude interruption. I live by a train station. Every single other time I've managed to mute it once I heard the train. This guy just leads off with the horn. Anyways. Is there a way to make sure that you're including combats randomly, which is great because it gets people a lot of variety and a lot of variance and ups and downs in terms of sometimes they encounter cakewalks, and sometimes they encounter really high level enemies, and sometimes things are just balanced enough to make it swing one way or the other, and then sometimes circumstantially the players are just well suited for something that would otherwise be a difficult fight, but it turns into a cakewalk. Do you have any guardrails? Okay, do you have any guardrails on your random table encounters? Go.
Yeah. So that kind of ties into a little bit, like, first off, the kind of the first order of business is the monster mindless or not? And if they're not, then they should have some sort of reaction. And so that's an opportunity, like a high reaction is some opportunity for roleplay. Like, you'll have kind of maybe disloyal goblins who don't like the goblin chief, and they're willing to tell you where he's at or what his defenses are or something like that for a few shiny bits and baubles. Mm-hmm. And that's quite fun. It doesn't necessarily have to be like every random encounter. I mean, I think the JRPG has done a great disservice, and people sort of take that, like, every time I get a random encounter, it means it's a fight, and you have to grind and do all this stuff, and that's not the case. Like, you're really, like, the monsters sort of like have their own little things. Maybe they run into a bunch of heavily armed adventurers, and they're not super eager to jump them either. Like, they know how it's going to go. Yeah. So that's kind of your first thing, and it gives the players to, like, you can be down in the dungeon and players get to roleplay. Like, that's cool. And it's not necessarily a slog. It could be very interesting. Or sometimes they run into something way stronger than them and they got to run away. That could be also really interesting. Mm-hmm. And you have, like, interesting problems of, like, say they're loaded down with gear and loot and they're trying to exit and they run into something. Like, that's a problem. Like a strategic issue, or tactical issue at that point.
Well, maybe it doesn't roll. Maybe the critter, if it rolls a negative, gets a low reaction roll and decides to fight, and not retreat for whatever. Or maybe this is a combination of both. Let's say it's a kobold, and it doesn't want to fight these loaded adventurers who have a ton of fucking gold and stuff. But there's a pouch that has a bunch of gold, mm-hmm. And if it just takes it and runs away, then
Yeah,
it's
right.
that the kobold's going to level up. We can only assume.
He's going to pay his training costs and be a level 2 kobold. Yeah, no, it's right, exactly. So there's like 100 little ways that you can make it interesting. I recently had a random encounter where the players were going through the dungeon and they found Dracolisks. Dracolisks are crossbred dragons that are crossbred with basilisks. So they're dragons that basically can turn people to stone.
Jesus.
Yeah, terrifying mod. They're horrible. And so basically, like the players run. The players run into these Draculas, two Draculisks, and these like they're just surrounded by statues, and they figured out like what was going on there. They they looked at the picture and said, "This thing could probably turn people to stone. It looks like a basilisk." And they had like the records, like this is Pathfinder. They had knowledges, so they were able to identify the creature. And yeah, so the basilisk drew neutral, and they negotiated. So they're like, "Hey, I'll let you." The basilisks were like, "I'll let you go. You bring me food." And they're like, "Oh yeah, totally." And they managed to like bluff their way out, and they're just like, "We're not going back there, right?" And they're like, "No, we're not." So
that's one interpretation.
Yeah, it was very. It was a very interesting kind of encounter, and they walked out of there like there had actually no fights that evening. They had a few random encounters, but no fights, and they left, and they were like you could like the tension relief was palpable. They had taken no hit point damage, yet they were basically like terrified. They're terrified for their characters' lives the entire time.
Yeah, they came across something that they could really make or break their night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if it decided to like use its gaze attack, like it was a fortitude save, and they had some people with low fortitude saves. Like it might like somebody was probably going to get turned to stone, maybe multiple people. And
probably one of the people who you would rely on to turn people back from stone.
Yeah, like your mages and stuff, and like they were like level 6 or 7, and it's like 2 CR9 creatures. So like and Pathfinder CRs are kind of a little all over the place, but they're generally fairly accurate. So it would have been they probably would have won
2 or 3 levels over. It's generally going to be rough, right?
Yeah. So it's like it had like 8 hit dice or something, 7 or 8 hit dice each. So they probably would have won, but they would have taken casualties. Like at least half the party either would have died or been turned to stone. Like statistically, it would have worked out in their favor. But the point is it was a really interesting encounter. It was a random encounter, and the guardrails were like again the reaction rolls, and sometimes there's things you can do to like increase the roll. You know, maybe they offered a bit of food, or maybe they do like immediately like try to negotiate, or they use a diplomacy, like they have an opportunity for like a diplomacy check or something. Like I don't know, there's 100 ways to interpret things, or their stealth, they run in the encounter, their stealth rolls are high enough, and the things don't see them. Like there's all kinds of advantages that you can have, and there's all kinds of ways in and out of problems. And it's dynamic.
God, that was such a good comment about how JRPGs just ruin people's minds.
No, I know, because it's like they popularized random encounter. Like even the term, like everybody sort of relates it, like like Final Fantasy, and you're like, yeah, like Final Fantasy.
I'm like, it's a little bit more like the Daggerfall or Skyrim, or
yeah, right, exactly. It's like, right, and it's it's important to remember, like Final Fantasy, it was derived from like a D&D game, I believe that's the case. This might be folk knowledge, but I believe it was derived from D&D, but it's like they kind of made it like they kind of Japanese-ified it. And it was kind of so like the random encounter sort of like turned into this like always hostile thing, and now that's kind of what it is in everybody's mind.
Yeah, and it affects how people see the classes. Like, what's the eternal debate on, I don't know, like, what's the value of a rogue if the wizard can cast knock, and what's the value of a fighter if the wizard can haste themselves and make 2 attacks? It's like, man, if you're missing half the game, then yeah, I get it. A lot of these resources, I'm sure there are circumstances under which it's not your fault for thinking that a pound of lead is heavier than a pound of feathers.
Mm-hmm.
But it just really makes it difficult. It's just really difficult to talk over with people because they're missing so much of the conversation. Like if you can't establish, like, well, lead, this area of lead is heavier than this area of feathers. It's like, well, yes, but if you have a lot of feathers here on this side, then it kind of balances out. And you can't have those conversations with people because they're missing these critical priors that just command the conversation. If I can't talk to somebody about how random encounters produce like reaction rolls like that was your answer, is encounter reactions are the rails for yeah, the rails for random encounters. Sure,
Yeah.
trolls are,
And kind of
go ahead.
yeah, like reactions and sort of like player precautions, I would say.
Yes.
Distill it down.
If you have somebody who's a fighter and has like a reasonably, and also has a reasonably high charisma, maybe not high enough to be a paladin, we'll say that they started off with like a 15 charisma instead of a 17 charisma, so they can't be a paladin, but they can be a really they decided to be a really charismatic fighter, and none of the mages are charismatic. You're gonna send that fighter ahead of you at all times to be the front man. And now he can take a hit from the troll that happens to be in the room, but also if he rolls really positively on that encounter reaction chart, it's using his charisma because he's the man at the front, then you're getting the best of both worlds, and he gets to be the person who negotiates with the troll. And then maybe the people who are, sure, maybe a wizard could haste themselves and do the job of the fighter, but they have fewer hit points than the fighter. And that's not really a wizardly thing that they want to do. So maybe what they do instead is, even if they don't have particularly strong fighters, like we'll say it's like mostly thieves and magic users, and like a druid and a cleric inside the party, maybe instead of being the people who fight in place of a fighter, maybe an encounter reaction, properly rolled, results in a temporary NPC ally. And so that's the person you cast haste on. I don't want to aid me with haste. I don't care about the troll beyond this one session, beyond this one objective that we're working together with, and a troll with haste is going to be pretty nasty.
Right.
All the conversations about encounter balance just completely break down.
Yes. Well, and that's I really kind of despise the conversation around encounter balance, because encounters are like a third of the game, maybe a fourth. Yeah. So you have like there's a whole other part of the game out there. So you're talking about like, okay, let's say the wizard can haste, he gets his 2 attacks or something. Like that's cool, or he could turn invisible, but like, does a wizard have enough spell slots to be able to pull a heist? Like, right, exactly. Obviously so it's like, oh yeah, so the wizard might be able to place. He could be kind of a backup quarterback in the dungeon, but hey, wizard, you go pull a heist, and it's like, well, I don't know, I won't have enough. Like, I gotta go. I have 5 minutes of invisibility or something, and I can make I can get in and out. But
I have a knock spell that alerts rogue everybody is the one in a 300-foot radius that a door just opened.
Right. And so, like, let's say you're like there's an item you're trying to get out of a fortress, which is not uncommon. I think there's always some kind, like, I think that comes up at least once, like every 6 months in a campaign, I feel like. And you're gonna have a situation where the rogue's the only person for the job. So yeah, like that's kind of what I'm saying. Like the same thing with like fighter, and I think again, first edition sort of fighters, or sort of, you need fighters to even have an army in the first place, like to really like have it loyal and work. But like fighters sort of fulfill that role as like kind of like a leader of soldiers, and I've sort of tried to adapt that a little bit even into my like Pathfinder game, and I'm probably going to do so when we do like 5e or something. So yeah, it's like there's always a situation to where outside combat isn't isn't even close to being the whole game, and that's why I really like the or the dungeon and the kind of like the kind of granular tactical encounters are not even close to being the whole game. And that's why I think like when people talk about like comparative video games, this game predates video games, and so you really sort of really need to actually come at it from the back end. So like I learned so much about RPG. Yeah, I learned so much about RPGs by reading Tony Bath, like way more about RPGs reading Tony Bath than I ever did, like kind of looking at contemporary video game like D&D design.
That's so funny. I have like the complete opposite reaction. I learned so much about like going through video games, people who do either author branching narrative and talking about how they do defensive logic for dealing with situations and sort of prepping, or their method of prepping for player encounters in ways where they could just write stuff in or roll stuff up pretty quickly, or the way that, say, Total War handles domain play, or the way that the way that Baldur's Gate 3, it's my favorite game right now because it gave me everything that when I loved conventional play, Baldur's Gate 3 would have given me almost everything that I wanted out of 5th edition if that was the system for 5th edition. And
oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I love that stuff, but it goes to your point. I hate to admit it, it really does go to your point. Like if I were to compare the game, if I was to say, it's like 3 different ways that, God, I'm competing with myself now because I have like 5 different thoughts going at once. Quantum Wings says there's a big overlap in game design between video games and tabletop. I think there's a 1-to-1 overlap. I think that Venn diagram is almost a circle, and everything that's not in the same circle everything that's not in that overlap is mostly a function of whether or not you can plug a controller in to play the game, or whether or not you have to use a piece of paper. I think there's a huge overlap. I think there's a lot to learn from video games. I just think that people take the wrong lessons from video games.
No, yeah, okay. So let's kind of dig in a little further then. Yeah. Let's say like I think, all right, fair enough. So I think the right lessons can be taken from video games, but I would recommend the best way to maximize taking the best lessons would be to understand kind of the origins, like going back to before, like what it was kind of like pulled itself, what D&D kind of manifested from, will kind of tell you a little bit about like kind of the bones of the system, and then you can kind of look at, because I think video games about D&D were derived from D&D, so you're kind of, it's like, what is it, trying to pull that back upstream is like not natural.
If we're talking about the old games, since then there's been so much crossover that like it's more incestuous than the British royal family.
Super.
I'll let you recover for a minute.
Right, and I still would, yeah. I think that's probably fair. Like I was saying, I don't know. It sounds like you drew the right conclusions. So obviously there's something to that. But yeah,
I say if I was like to worry about a lot more, like the proper reward structure. That's a huge one. Baldur's Gate 3, I have to find a magic item every 5 encounters, we'll say, and I have to be able to purchase them, and I have to be able to sell them, and there's a bunch of stuff that's not necessarily magical, or it's kind of pseudo-magical, that offers me additional tactical options that I can purchase as well. So it's not just magic items that allow me to be tactical in the game and game rewards. They also have a spread of other rewards that are good. And so those are the lessons that I'm taking from it. But those are to your point, those are those game elements that I love about modern video games, because I'm missing them in tabletop RPGs, are mirroring or matching the roots of the hobby. So if I go back to the roots of the hobby,
that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, okay. I was struggling to kind of like stitch all those threads together, but I think we got there.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is about like, okay, there's you said it earlier. The rules are not a one-to-one simulation of the game. They're kind of an approximation of the game, and there are ways that you could run it or play it that would, even if you were ostensibly following the rules exactly, would take it in the wrong direction. If you went through a dungeon and you had no loot and you never rolled up a magic item, that would probably be a deviation from the game. And its reward structure.
And that's kind of what like even the book is. Like the book is not a substitute for any rule set. It's basically just like what I tried to distill what the game even is to its kind of component parts so that you can know what to look for when you're sort of evaluating what game to play.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. All right. We only have a few more rooms here. This room is fake, by the way. You could continue moving. Because we covered a bunch of stuff. This is also fake. But there is a lot of blood coming from under the door here.
Oh, God.
His reaction. Okay. It's time to talk about player character death.
Oh.
So, how does the living campaign deal with or prepare for player character death? And does it, this is the important part, this is the one that you could lead off with, does it go further than players should just be ready to get over it because they have more characters? Go.
I mean, that's a big component. It's not like not even. I wouldn't even say like they should just get over it. I would say that they're naturally going to not be as affected because they're sort of their care is sort of spread over so many different personalities that they're also invested in. Because a lot of the problem with character death is let's say I have like they're first off they're spotlight characters.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one else, so if my character dies, I have to play somebody I don't know or care about yet, and like doesn't feel great. And I don't really like to get caught up in like how something feels as a player, but like it's not. I'd say they're probably right when it comes to that. It sucks. It's not like how can I expect somebody to be like instantly like if I die at level 7 and you just let me build a new level 7 character who's just like and now for somebody completely different. Even if it's temporary, even if I just do it till like I can resurrect my favorite character, it still is like I'm not. It's kind of bad. So if I'm running multiple characters and they're all sort of kind of progressing along like an act, like a progression, then that sort of feeling of ownership is spread out. And so if somebody dies and I have to play somebody else until I can resurrect a favorite, like it's actually somebody I know and care about and want to like see succeed. So I don't think that's a small thing. It's not a matter of like, oh, you got the backups, like suck it up. It's more like the person just won't complain in the first place, or won't complain as loudly in the first place.
Okay. You think that there are any? You hinted at this when you mentioned resurrection. Do you think that there are any advantages to? Do you think there are any advantages to the living campaign which help players better recover from player character death? By way of, let's say, resurrection was one of the ways that you mentioned. What else do we have on our menu here? Oh, did you hear me?
Oh yeah, it was so okay. I was reviewing something. I was reviewing something in the book. I was trying to find something specific, and I couldn't do it.
What are you thinking of? I've already started dog-earing this. I've had it for a day.
Oh, good. So I was thinking about resurrection is one of those things where like a lot of people don't want to use it because they feel like it's like narratively cheap, I guess. But there's like again like several ways in which resurrection can fail. Generally, so
Ooh,
it
System
can be
Shock.
permanent. Yeah. Is that? It's been a while since I played it.
System
System
Shock. I
Shock.
think System.
System Shock. Yeah.
Yeah.
My brain immediately went to the video game. No, System Shock.
Oh
Yeah, the
yeah,
System
that's
Shock roll.
right.
I was like, is there a mechanic in the video game? I still had video games on the mind.
Poor Inspector
No,
and
System
Chris
Shock.
Avalon
Yeah.
are like speaking into both of my ears right now, and I did not. Fuck. Anyway.
No, the System Shock rolls in AD&D. Yes, exactly. So yeah, so a resurrection can go Ari, and that happens. In my Pathfinder game, I have resurrection limited to con mod +1 with a minimum 1. So everybody kind of gets 1, at least. If they're particularly con heavy, like they'll get like another 1 or 2. It does need to be limited to some extent, but having it is still, I think, important because first off, it's some mechanic of the game. It's also a way to get more gold out of the players. Like, it's something they still have to allocate for. So it's another tactical consideration because, again, it's a game. And so, yeah. So it's like, and also it kind of will lessen a little bit of that death anxiety. Like between you're trying to dilute the death anxiety over multiple points. So it's like multiple characters is 1, resurrection is another, and then maybe there's like items you can get that kind of give you like a free out or something, and that's something that you're going to want to consider. So you could build your character. And AD&D builds are like, they're not built like as classes. It's more like the equipment that you're able to kind of get in magic items and stuff. But
Right.
yeah, but
even
the
then
point
you're
stands.
choosing what to equip and kind of and
Yeah.
paste onto one.
The differentiation between classes basically comes from like what's equipped or what spells are prepared. But yeah, so that would be what I would say.
Special for fighters, are not accessible to wizards.
Right, exactly. And not every fighter is going to have the same magic sword. They might all have like the same like to hit progression, but that and they both get armies or whatever. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, that's kind of what I would say, is that like the living campaign sort of dilutes that over many points, because kind of death and having a fail state is kind of important to having a like coherent game, because letting players kind of get away with everything and not ever really experiencing failure, ironically, will kind of like, they will start to like kind of lose interest in the game.
Yeah. Are there any?
You can't get around it.
Ooh, shoot. No, you're right. So even if dying is typically the point at which people stop playing in a lot of video games. And in tabletop games, TPKs will, or even just an individual death, will typically murk somebody's willingness or excitement to play, their momentum. Even if they do come back the next session, it is a loss to the campaign. And so what you've done, like you said, is mitigated the death anxiety from multiple different points, because you're losing an asset out of many assets. If you only had one magic item and you lost that magic item, it would really suck. And you might be correct to say that the DM, or to interpret the situation as the DM taking it from you. But if you have 10 magic items, then even if the DM did just take it from you, it's like, all right, well. And I'm curious. I'm curious as to whether or not, and this is on the spot, and not something, by the way, not something that I would expect to be covered in the book. Is there something that you would... Is there a method of positively alleviating that death anxiety, or a positive reaction to death that's well suited to the living campaign? Or does that denigrate too much or too far the second order effects of fail state, avoid bad behavior? Go.
It would... No. So I'll give an example. So there's actually, death can fuel action. So I had a player in downtime. He got a message that he had a little bit of like, this character had a background. Somebody was hunting him. So thugs of this NPC that is hunting this character jumped him, and the character they were following him. I sent him a message like, you noticed them following, and he said I confront them like out in the street, and he sort of provoked a fight, and these guys surrounded him and sneak attack. They were all rogues, and they stood decently high level, and they sneak attacked him to death. The character died,
Ooh.
like it got shanked to death and bled out in the street in downtime. The guy immediately, like, this happened in broad daylight. It happened in a populated area, and it was actually in the town of a player character who was the lord of that town. And so the other player got a message that your guards report that there was a stabbing in the street. Some of the assailants died. The rest of them fled. It looks like they fled the city. And so the noble character, the noble player, put a quest in, said, we're trying to, like, looks like they killed one of my buddies. Like, he found out that, you know, the alchemist was missing. And so he basically got a posse together, and they had like a big old quest where they went to like kind of the next major city and did like a manhunt and tried to find these people. They found a whole warehouse full of them, and they kind of cleaned it out. They recovered the body and brought him to the local church for resurrection. It was really cool because they're basically on the warpath, like you know, going full Judge Dredd on anybody that won't tell them information, you know, because like one of their buddies is gone and was like basically killed in broad daylight. So in that way, like the player got to participate in the recovery of his own character because he had another character of similar level that he was almost as invested in.
Okay, that is pretty cool. I had a similar situation in this campaign recently, which is actually what this map was originally for. I don't know if I'm going to get to use it now, but it was let's see here. I didn't run this session. I wasn't present. I think it was the second session in this that I wasn't even in this campaign that I wasn't even present for. But Bar ran very simple Nosferatu tomb, and a bunch of new players came in. I think 2 of the players were completely new. It was one of the players. No, it was 2 of the players' very first session in there, and then there was a third player, Hart, who it was there. Was it Hart? No, I don't know if it was Hart, but it was only 3 characters. For 2 of them, it was the very first session, and they got wrecked. They cast. They were in a fight with some vampire spawn, and then I think one of the players, the one who died, saw a coffin and thought that if he destroyed the coffin with shatter, he thought it belonged to one of the vampire spawn that they were fighting. If he destroyed the coffin, that it might kill the spawn or otherwise like debilitate it, because they were really struggling. Right, the bard can't use any of their charm effects or thought that they couldn't use any of their charm effects on the vampire spawn, because most of it targeted humanoids, and there's a warlock there who's not really doing a lot. They're trying their best, and then there's an elven blade singer who's standing in front, and they destroy this coffin, and the boss, in quotes, of the dungeon crawls out, very pissed off, and just slaughters them.
Yeah, right.
And the players, after several months... No, not after several months. There was connection successful. Okay, we're good. We're back. We're so back. I marked it all on the calendar. Ooh, it's going up and down. It's going up and down a lot. Calendar, and said, you guys, I didn't tell them which day it was. I told them, hey, you have to get here within the next 10 days. He might become turned. Yeah, there we go. Soul becomes turned, and that was on the 12/22. They literally played the day before that, didn't they? No. Oh god, that's amazing. There we go. We reconnected again. It's a good thing I had this recording here. Ah. Okay.
So is there a door here?
There is a door there. It just goes back around. I think that's everything. Like I said, I had a few additional quote rooms here. Like, what was it, on the south end? What happens if I grab you? I'm gonna grab you and drag once you've here. I think it's over here.